The Ghost of the Industry. Act 1, Erasure. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Disappeared. The first time Izuku Midoriya vanished, he was 12 years old and standing in the school hallway while Katsuki Bakugo raised a hand to strike him. The blow never landed. One moment Izuku was there, shoulders braced and eyes shut, and the next he simply was not. He slipped out of the world the way a word slips from the tongue, leaving behind only the faint impression that something had been present a breath before. Bakugo's fist struck the wall. The concrete cracked. He spun around, cursing, searching for the small boy with the notebook and the two wide eyes, and found nothing. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A single green sneaker print marked the floor where Izuku had stood. 3 blocks away, Izuku became visible again. He was sitting on the curb outside a convenience store, his hands pressed flat against the pavement as if testing whether the world was solid, whether he was still part of it. His heart hammered. His skin felt like static. And somewhere in the space between fear and something he could not yet name, he understood that whatever had just happened was not going to be easy to explain. He never tried to explain it. Not to his mother, not to any doctor, not to the quirk counselor the school assigned him after his results came back quirkless. He had learned by then the art of strategic silence, the way the truly powerless learn to move through the world without drawing attention. He was already invisible in the ways that mattered most. His quirk, when he finally understood what it was, simply made that invisibility complete. He called it erasure, privately, in the notebooks he filled with cramped green handwriting. But that name was already taken by a pro-hero he admired, so he settled for thinking of it as the vanish. The mechanics of it, as best he could reconstruct from careful self-observation, were straightforward and terrifying in equal measure. When active, he did not merely turn invisible. He was erased from the perceptible world. Cameras did not record him. Motion sensors did not detect him. Dogs did not scent him. And most critically, most devastatingly, people who were looking directly at him simply did not register his presence. The moment he left a room, the memory of his having been there began to dissolve. In 10 minutes, anyone who had seen him could not recall his face. In an hour, they could not recall that anyone had been there at all. He was, in the most precise sense, forgettable. He spent 3 years learning the edges of his ability. He could sustain it for roughly 4 hours before exhaustion forced him back into visibility. He could modulate it, let himself flicker back in degrees, choose to be seen only by specific people if he was careful and close. The amnesia effect did not apply to people he chose to reveal himself to, which told him the ability had a cognitive component, a kind of signal he could broadcast or withhold. He trained his body the same way All Might had trained his. He ran every morning along the beach where the old hero sometimes walked, though they never spoke. He built his legs until they were engines, his arms until they were cables, because a quirk that required stillness would eventually get him killed, and Izuku Midoriya had no intention of dying for anyone's convenience. By the time he was 15, he had already begun to understand what the hero industry actually was. The understanding came slowly, the way most important understandings do. It came in fragments. The late-night documentary he watched with his mother about hero agencies and their debt structures, the forum threads he found buried under layers of hero fan content where former sidekicks described working conditions that made factory floors look generous. It came in the form of a woman named Hanako Sato who worked at the licensing bureau and who posted anonymously about heroes being contractually prohibited from refusing assignments, from choosing their own patrol routes, from speaking publicly about anything their agency had not pre-approved. It came, most viscerally, on a Tuesday in October when he was 16 and standing unseen on the rooftop of the Endeavor Agency building, having climbed there for no reason except that he could and that the view of the city at dusk was extraordinary from that height. He had not intended to witness anything. He had been there to watch the sky turn orange and think about whether he still wanted to attempt the UA entrance exam. What he witnessed instead was a meeting on the rooftop terrace below him, between an agency executive he recognized from press conferences and a woman he recognized from hero trading cards. Her name, on the card, was Crane. Her rating was B-class. She had a flight-based quirk and a record of 12 civilian rescues in the past 18 months. He watched her hand over a thick envelope. He watched the executive tuck it into his jacket without opening it. He watched Crane's shoulders carry the particular geometry of someone who has accepted a humiliation so completely that she has stopped registering it as humiliation at all. She left through the rooftop door. The executive made a phone call. Izuku did not hear the words, but he did not need to. The envelope told the story clearly enough. She was paying for the right to keep her license active. She was paying, probably monthly, for the privilege of being allowed to be a hero. He thought about it for a long time on the train home. He thought about it through dinner, through his mother's cheerful commentary about a hero wedding she had seen covered on the news. He thought about it in bed, staring at the ceiling, and somewhere around midnight he stopped thinking about the UA entrance exam entirely. He had a different kind of exam to prepare for. The hero industry in Japan was, on its surface, a meritocracy. You passed the entrance exams, you earned your provisional license, you worked as a sidekick under an established agency, and if you accumulated enough commendations and your agency's public relations team managed your image skillfully enough, you were eventually permitted to operate under your own hero name with some modest degree of autonomy. The surface was polished to a brilliant shine. Beneath it was a network of contracts, exclusivity agreements, image rights clauses, debt arrangements dressed as signing bonuses, and performance metrics that ensured the most profitable heroes, the ones with the best quirks and the best faces and the best merchandise potential, were kept tightly bound to the agencies that had invested in them. The industry did not want free heroes. Free heroes were unpredictable. Free heroes said things to journalists that agencies had not approved. Free heroes helped people in ways that did not generate enough footage for the evening news. Izuku had been studying this system for 2 years by the time he made his first real move, and he had come to a conclusion that would have appalled every hero teacher he might have had. The system was not broken. It was working exactly as designed. It was designed to produce maximum commercial output, not maximum human welfare, and it was doing so efficiently and without shame. He was 17 when he became the Ghost. Chapter 2, The First Rescue. Lady Nagant had been shooting at things for 11 years. She had been doing it legally for 9 of those years, under the guidance of the Hero Public Safety Commission, which had given her a codename and a salary and a list of targets. The targets were not always villains. She had known this for most of those 9 years and had told herself the story that all effective people tell themselves when the work requires a certain flexibility of conscience. The targets were necessary, the Commission's judgment was sound, the alternative was something worse. She had told herself this story until the morning she received a file with a photograph she recognized. The photograph was of a hero. A real one, in the old sense of the word. Izumi Kuroda, a class, known professionally as vigilance, who had spent 14 years doing exactly what the Public Safety Commission claimed to exist to enable. Izumi Kuroda, who had recently given an interview to an independent journalist about agency debt structures and the licensing payment system. Izumi Kuroda, who was apparently a problem that required solving. Lady Nagant had put the file down on the desk in the Commission's office and walked out of the building. She had not shot Izumi Kuroda. She had also not reported the Commission's request to any oversight body, because the Commission had no meaningful oversight body, which she had always known but somehow managed not to think about directly until that morning. 18 months later she was in Tartarus, the maximum security facility for the most dangerous criminals in Japan, convicted of the murder of a pro-hero, which was accurate, and nothing else, which was a careful omission. The pro-hero she had killed had been doing things that made the Izumi Kuroda situation look like a minor policy disagreement. She did not regret that particular shot. She regretted the 18 months of shots that preceded it. She had been in Tartarus for 4 months when the lights went out. Not the building lights. The lights went out across the entire facility, every sensor, every camera, every electronic monitoring system, for exactly 43 seconds. When they came back on, the door to her cell was open. She was a professional. She did not stand in her cell wondering what was happening. She moved. The hallway outside was empty except for a note taped to the wall across from her door. It was written in green ink, in handwriting that was precise and slightly too small, as if the writer habitually compressed their words to fit more thought into less space. The note said, "Third corridor, maintenance shaft B, roof access. There is a bag. The bag has everything you need to leave the city. You do not owe me anything. I am not asking you to become anything. But if you decide you would like to do something with the time, you know where the problems are. You always did." It was not signed. She went up the maintenance shaft. The bag was there, as promised: cash, a change of clothes, a burner phone with a single number stored in it, and a small box of protein bars that struck her, for some reason, as the most touching element of the entire arrangement. Someone had thought about the fact that she would be hungry. She sat on the roof of Tartarus for 90 seconds, which was the longest she could afford. Below her, the facility was beginning to register that something was wrong. In the distance, she could hear the first faint sounds of an alert beginning to organize itself. She looked at the burner phone. She put it in the bag. She picked up the bag and she went over the edge of the roof in a controlled descent, her body remembering the work it had been built for, and she moved through the dark in the direction of the city and did not look back. She did not call the number for 6 weeks. When she did, it rang twice. Then a voice said, quietly and without preamble, "I was wondering how you were." She had been a professional for 11 years. She had been in rooms with people who radiated menace the way radiators radiate heat. She had dealt with every category of dangerous person the Commission's assignments had ever produced. She was not a person who was easily surprised. The voice on the phone was young. It was careful. It sounded like someone who thought before every sentence, not because they were slow but because they understood that words were tools and tools should be used precisely. "Who are you?" she said. Not a question. A specification. A pause. Then, "Someone who has been paying attention." "That's not an answer." "No," the voice agreed. "It isn't. But it's the only one I have that's safe for both of us right now. I know you're in the city. I know you have questions. I have some answers. Not all of them. But enough to be worth a meeting, if you're willing." She looked at the ceiling of the small apartment she had rented with the cash from the bag. She had been watching the news every morning, tracing the shape of what she did not yet understand. She had found the edges of something large. "Where?" she said. The meeting place was a disused printing facility in the Muzutafu warehouse district, which she recognized immediately as a location chosen for its excellent sightlines and complete absence of functional surveillance equipment. Whoever she was meeting understood operational security at a level that went beyond casual preparation. She arrived 40 minutes early and did a full perimeter check. She found nothing. She took a position in the upper walkway with sightlines to every entrance and settled in to wait. He arrived exactly on time, which told her something. She was watching the south entrance when he simply appeared in the center of the building's ground floor. Not from a door. Not from a window. He was not there, and then he was, as if the air had decided to construct a person from ambient light and the memory of someone standing in that spot. He was young. Younger than the voice had prepared her for. He was not tall, not obviously built for violence, though the way he held himself suggested a body that had been trained past comfort. He had green hair that looked like it had grown past a point he had been meaning to cut it for several months, and eyes that were the color of old forests. He was wearing dark, nondescript clothing and carrying nothing visible. He looked up at the walkway where she was standing and said, calmly, "You got here early." "Good." She kept her rifle at ease. "You walked through a wall." "I didn't, actually. There's a gap in the eastern wall's structural reinforcement that's large enough for a person to move through if they're not visible. The building's maintenance records haven't been updated in 4 years." A small pause. "I checked. You weren't visible." "No. I'm usually not." He looked up at her steadily. "My name is Izuku. I'd ask you to come down, but I understand if you prefer the high ground. We can talk like this if you need to." She came down. Not because she trusted him, not yet, but because the dynamic she was reading from him was not threat or manipulation. It was something she had almost forgotten existed, simple, earnest respect. He was treating her as someone capable of making her own decisions, which was an experience she had not had in professional contexts since approximately the first year of her commission service. She stood 6 feet from him and looked him over carefully. He did not shift under the assessment. He was accustomed to being looked at by people deciding whether he was dangerous. "How old are you?" she said. 17. She processed this. "And what exactly do you think you're doing?" He was quiet for a moment. When he answered, it was with the precision she had noticed on the phone, each word placed deliberately. "I think I'm doing the thing that should have been done a long time ago by people with more resources than me," he said. "I'm paying attention to what the industry actually is. And I'm trying to give people who are trapped in it a way out, or a way to do something real with what they know and what they can do. I'm not trying to burn it down. I don't have the capacity to burn it down, and I'm not sure burning it would help anyway. I'm trying to build something else. Something smaller and less visible and significantly less profitable, which is probably why it might actually work." She studied him. "And what do you want from me?" "Nothing you haven't already decided to give," he said. "I didn't break you out to recruit you. I broke you out because what they did to you was wrong and they were not going to fix it themselves. What happens next is your choice. But if you decide you want to work with me, I would be grateful for it. I'm not going to pretend I don't need help. I'm 17 and I'm trying to dismantle something that took decades to build, and I know exactly how absurd that sounds." Something shifted in Lady Nagant's chest. It was not warmth, exactly. It was more like recognition. The recognition of someone looking at a problem with clear eyes and choosing to engage it anyway, without the protection of institutional backing or the comfort of official approval. She had once been that person. Before the commission had refined her into something more useful. "What's your plan?" she said. He pulled a notebook from inside his jacket. She almost laughed. He was 17 and he was carrying a notebook and he was the most dangerous person she had met in years, which was not because of his quirk. It was because he had been paying attention. Chapter 3, The Name Midnight Carries. Mimuri Kayama had built her public image the way architects build load-bearing walls, deliberately, expensively, and with a precise understanding of what it was designed to support. The image was exactly what the industry required it to be. Confident. Charismatic. Slightly provocative in a way that generated press without generating genuine controversy. She had refined it over 16 years until it was something she could put on in the morning like a second skin. Underneath it she was exhausted in a way that sleep did not fix. She had been teaching at UA for 4 years. Teaching was supposed to be the good part, the part where she gave back, where the work connected to something other than quarterly metrics and agency optics. And it was good, genuinely, in the moments when a student understood something they had not understood before and their face did the specific thing that faces do in that moment. She lived for those moments. She collected them the way other people collected photographs. But UA had a board. The board had relationships with every major agency in Japan. The curriculum for hero education was not, she had slowly come to understand, primarily designed to produce good heroes. It was designed to produce heroes who were legible to the agency system, who understood how to operate within its structures, who would not arrive at their first internships asking uncomfortable questions about contract terms. She had started making small changes to her lessons 2 years ago. Small enough that they did not attract attention. Additions to the discussion sections, case studies she designed herself using anonymized examples from public records, conversations that ran slightly past the bell. She had her students analyze not just the tactical elements of hero work but the structural ones. Who benefits from this response? What constraints is this hero operating under? What would they do differently without those constraints? The board had noticed 8 months ago. She had received a memo, politely worded, reminding her that UA's educational philosophy emphasized preparation for industry integration. She had written a politely worded response expressing her enthusiasm for industry integration and her commitment to preparing students for the full complexity of professional heroics. She had then continued her lessons as before. A second memo had arrived 2 months later. A meeting had been scheduled. The meeting had been, in the particular way of institutional pressure, very pleasant and very clear. Her contract was up for renewal in 7 months. The board had always valued her contributions enormously. They were confident she understood the importance of alignment. She understood exactly what alignment meant. She was sitting in her office at 10 in the evening on a Wednesday, grading papers, and thinking about what it would mean to simply not renew, to walk away from the position she had built and the students she was not yet done teaching, when the office window, which she was quite certain she had locked, opened. Nothing came through it. No person, no object, no sound except the faint whisper of outside air. She was on the 3rd floor. She was not a person who startled easily, but she pushed her chair back and stood, and her hand moved to the small canister of sleep-inducing spray she kept in her desk drawer, which she had not reached for in 3 years but had also never stopped keeping there. "Please don't," said a voice from the direction of the window. "I have genuinely terrible reaction time to chemical agents. It would be embarrassing for both of us." The voice was young and careful. It was coming from a point about 5 feet from the window, which appeared to be empty. "Show yourself," she said. She was proud of how steady her voice was. "I am going to. I just wanted to ask permission first, because appearing without warning in someone's office at night is already alarming enough without adding to it." She stared at the empty air. "You have my permission." He materialized the way dawn works, gradual and then suddenly complete. He was young, green-haired, unremarkable in appearance in every way except the quality of attention in his eyes, which was extraordinary. He had a notebook under his arm. "You're Midoriya's kid," she said, because she had an excellent memory for students she had observed without formally teaching, and she had been observing him since his first year. "Izuku Midoriya. You never applied to UA. No. Your mother is Inko Midoriya. She works in the district office." "Yes. You're supposed to be quirkless." He looked at her steadily. "That's what the tests said." She processed the fact that he had just walked through a 3rd-floor locked window without triggering any of UA's security systems, which were not simple systems. She processed the fact that he had, apparently, been undetectable until he chose not to be. "The tests were wrong," she said. "The tests measured what was apparent. My quirk isn't apparent." He paused. "I came to tell you that I know about the board's second memo. I know about your contract. I know what they're asking you to stop doing, and I know you haven't stopped. I also know you've been looking at the contract terms very carefully and that you've consulted 2 different employment lawyers in the past month using accounts that aren't connected to your professional identity." The air in the room changed. It did not become threatening. It became, somehow, more honest. As if the pretense of normal had been gently set aside. "You've been watching me," she said. "I've been watching UA," he said. "You were the part of it that made the watching worthwhile." He said it simply, without flattery, as a statement of observed fact. "I'm not here to offer you an escape. I don't think you want one. I think you want to keep teaching. I'm here because I might be able to help you do that in a context where the board does not have a vote." She looked at him for a long moment. She had met all categories of extraordinary people in her career. She had developed a fairly reliable internal calibration for assessing them. Her calibration told her something she had not expected. He was not extraordinary in the way heroes were supposed to be extraordinary, flashy and powerful and oriented toward impact in its most visible forms. He was extraordinary in the way that certain teachers were extraordinary, and certain engineers, and the best intelligence analysts she had ever encountered through commission adjacency. He saw things. He tracked things. He built pictures from fragments and then he used the pictures to make decisions. "Tell me," she said, and sat back down at her desk and folded her hands, "what context you have in mind." He opened his notebook. She did not dismiss him until past midnight. And when he left, vanishing back through the window as quietly as he had arrived, she sat for a long time in the office she had occupied for 4 years and felt something she had not felt since the early days, before the alignment memos and the board meetings and the slow accumulation of compromises. She felt like something was beginning. He called it the archive. The name was informal, something he had started using in his notes and that had stuck because it described, with reasonable accuracy, what the operation was in its earliest form, a collection of records, of contacts, of documented evidence, of people who knew things and were willing to have those things known. The archive did not have a physical location, or rather it had several, none of them permanent. Izuku moved between a series of spaces he had identified over 2 years of careful scouting, an unused sublevel beneath a warehouse in the port district, a set of rooms above a restaurant whose owner he had done a quiet favor for and who asked no questions, a disused storage facility that belonged to a company that had dissolved 3 years ago and whose property transfer had become lost in the relevant bureaucracy. He funded it from sources that he had located the way archaeologists locate sites, through patient, methodical examination of public records, financial disclosures, and the carefully maintained anonymity of whistleblowers who had tried and failed to interest the proper authorities in what they knew. He had not stolen anything. He had found money that had already been stolen, traced it back to its origins, and diverted it through paths so labyrinthine that recovering it would have required the agencies responsible for taking it in the first place to admit, publicly, that they had taken it. They had chosen not to. He had not planned to build an organization. Organizations had hierarchies and hierarchies had vulnerabilities. What he had planned to build was a network, something more like a web than a ladder, where every connection was lateral and every member's most important relationship was with the work itself. Lady Nagant joined him 6 weeks after the Tartarus extraction. She had spent those 6 weeks doing her own research, verifying what he had told her, constructing her own picture of the agency-commission relationship from documents she had accumulated during her service years and never quite managed to destroy. When she arrived at the warehouse sublevel she had determined was his primary operating location through a process she declined to explain in detail, she was carrying a hard drive and wearing an expression that said she had made a decision and intended to honor it. She sat down across from him and put the hard drive on the table between them. 11 years of commission records, she said. Incomplete, but better than what you have. The encryption is commission standard from 8 years ago. If your analysis is as good as your research suggests, you can break it. He looked at the drive. He looked at her. You verified everything. I verified everything. And? She was quiet for a moment. It's worse than what you showed me. There are programs I wasn't aware of. Long-running ones. She paused. I thought I knew the shape of it. I didn't know the shape of it. He nodded slowly. He had suspected as much. The corner he had managed to illuminate was, he was increasingly certain, a corner of something considerably larger. Midnight comes on board in 3 weeks, he said. She's finishing out the semester. She is student, she doesn't want to leave mid-term. Lady Nagant raised an eyebrow. Kayama. Yes. She's been at UA for 4 years. Her public profile is enormous. She cannot disappear quietly. She's not going to disappear, he said. She's going to teach. Just somewhere different. The students she's building resources for right now are going to have materials available to them that the board cannot see and cannot revoke. She'll teach through those. It'll be slower and smaller than what she's doing now, but it won't be something anyone can send a memo to stop. Lady Nagant looked at him for a long moment. You planned this before you recruited either of us. I identified the problem before I identified the people, he said. The people came from the problem. You were the right person for what I needed because of who you already were, not because of any plan I made. I want to be clear about that. I didn't design any of this around you specifically. I'm designing it around the work. She was quiet again. Then she said, that's either the most honest thing a 17-year-old has ever said to me or a very sophisticated manipulation. I know, he said. I can't prove which one it is. You'll have to decide for yourself. She pushed the hard drive across the table toward him. Get to work, she said. Chapter 4, What the Cameras Miss. The Hosu incident, as the media called it, lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes of hero-on-villain engagement that destroyed 4 blocks of commercial property, injured 23 civilians who had failed to evacuate in time, and generated enough broadcast footage to dominate the news cycle for a week. What the cameras missed occupied Izuku's attention for considerably longer. He had been in Hosu that night by coincidence. He had been tracking a different thread entirely, a money flow between 3 mid-tier agencies and a licensing bureau administrator, and the thread had led him to a building in the Hosu commercial district that he had wanted to observe. He had been on a rooftop 2 blocks from the eventual incident site when the villain attack began. He had watched the heroes respond. He had tracked their movements, noted the coordination failures, observed the moments where property protection had been prioritized over civilian extraction. He had also watched, with growing attention, a woman he recognized operating in the spaces between the camera angles. Her name on her license was Crane, B-Class, Flight-Based Quirk. He had seen her before. He had watched her hand over an envelope on a rooftop 8 months ago and had been watching her peripherally ever since. Tonight she was moving through the evacuation zone, pulling people out of buildings that the primary response team had marked as secondary priority. She was fast and methodical and operating entirely without the cameras that followed the A-class heroes around the perimeter of the incident. She was also, he noted, entirely alone. No agency support. No sidekick backup. No one tracking her position. An unstable wall section came down on her as she was carrying an elderly woman out of a collapsed storefront. He saw it happen from 2 blocks away. The woman she was carrying was unharmed. Crane was not. He was moving before he had consciously decided to move. He arrived at the collapse site in under 3 minutes, invisible and therefore able to move through the emergency perimeter that heroes and police had established around the outer edge of the incident. He found her under a section of fallen concrete that was not, he confirmed quickly, large enough to have done permanent damage but was certainly large enough to have pinned her and cracked 2 ribs, which the angle of her breathing confirmed. She was conscious and trying to move herself, which was the wrong approach given the rib situation. He became visible. She stared at him. "Don't try to lift the slab," he said. "You're going to rotate it. Lie still." She was a professional. She processed the instruction and went still despite the fact that a person had appeared from nowhere and was now crouching next to her in a collapse zone. He moved the slab with leverage he had taken 2 years to develop and supported the structure above it with 2 temporary props he had in his bag because he had learned to carry them. Then he pulled her clear. She was sitting with her back against the exterior wall of the adjacent building, breathing carefully, when she looked at him again. "You're not wearing a costume," she said. "No. You're not a hero. Not in the licensed sense." She looked at him steadily. Her face was the face of someone recalculating. "You were watching me. I've been watching the district. You were the most interesting thing in it tonight." He paused. "You do the work the cameras don't cover. You've been doing it for months, at least. Probably longer." Something moved across her expression. Not surprise. Something more like the careful adjustment people make when someone sees them accurately. "I do what the assignment requires," she said. "Your assignment tonight was traffic control on the eastern perimeter." A pause. "Yes. The eastern perimeter is currently fine. The secondary evacuation zone isn't." He met her eyes. "I know about the envelope. I know about the payment structure. I know you've been covering gaps in the response grid that your agency doesn't officially acknowledge exist, because acknowledging them would require them to staff them, and staffing is expensive." The careful expression tightened. "Who are you?" "Someone who thinks you deserve better than what you have," he said. "And someone who might be able to offer it, if you're interested. You don't have to be. But if you are, there's a conversation worth having." He reached into his bag and produced the same type of burner phone he had given Lady Nagant, already showing a number. "When your ribs are dealt with. Take your time. The offer doesn't expire." He put the phone in her hand. He became invisible. He was gone before the paramedic team reached the collapse site. She called the number 4 days later. Midnight's departure from UA was quiet, which she had managed by the simple method of not departing dramatically. She fulfilled the final 6 weeks of her contract completely, submitted her curriculum materials to the department head along with a gracious note about her confidence in her colleagues, and said goodbye to her students in a class period that she structured as a discussion rather than a lecture, because she wanted the last thing she gave them to be the practice of their own thinking. She arrived at the archives warehouse sublevel on a Thursday evening with 2 bags and a tablet loaded with 5 years of accumulated research notes, and found Lady Nagant sitting across from a map that covered most of one wall, drinking coffee from a thermos and making marks. They had met once before, briefly, at a commission function 6 years ago. They regarded each other now with the particular assessment that competent women apply to other competent women when they are deciding whether the competence is genuine. "You're Kayama," Lady Nagant said. "You're Kana," Midnight replied. "It's strange to use your real name after so many years of the other one." "I find it clarifying," Lady Nagant said. She returned to the map. Midnight put down her bags and looked at the map. It was a network diagram overlaid on a geographic representation of Japan's hero agency distribution. The nodes were color-coded and annotated in two different handwriting styles, one very small and precise, one bold and spare. She recognized both from the documents she had already reviewed. "He does the analysis," she said, gesturing at the small writing. "You do the operational mapping. He's better at the analysis. I'm better at understanding what it means on the ground." Lady Nagant made another mark. "You're going to take the education function. He has materials prepared. He'll want to discuss the framework with you before you touch them, but the base structure is sound." Midnight pulled up a chair. "Where is he?" "Out. He's been tracking a new thread for 3 days. He doesn't sleep enough." A pause. "He's aware of this. He's chosen to prioritize differently. I've stopped having the conversation." Midnight absorbed this. "How old is he, actually?" 17. "He'll be 18 in July." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, he broke you out of Tartarus." "Yes. And then he recruited Crane. And me. And a licensing bureau administrator who has been quietly misfiling certain records for the past 3 months. And a retired sidearm instructor who runs a self-defense program for hero school students that the commission doesn't know exists, and a journalist who has been sitting on a story about the payment structure for 2 years because she can't find a way to publish it safely." Lady Nagant looked up. "The network is larger than you've been shown. He shows people what they need to see to make their own decisions. He doesn't give the whole picture until he's confident the person can use it responsibly. That's a significant amount of trust management." "Yes. It is." Lady Nagant held her gaze. "He's good at it." Which is either reassuring or concerning, depending on your perspective. "Which is it for you?" Lady Nagant considered this seriously. She looked back at the map. "Both," she said, "in roughly equal measure. But the concerning part is smaller than it was 2 months ago." Midnight looked at the map for a long time. At the nodes and the connections and the handwriting that was beginning to build a picture of something she had always suspected was there, just outside the reach of the institutional position she had occupied for so long. She picked up a pen. "Show me where you need the education layer," she said. Chapter 5, Shadow Council. The meeting that would later be referred to, internally and with some irony, as the founding session of the Shadow Council took place in the warehouse sublevel on a night in April when the rain against the corrugated roof was loud enough to function as effective noise suppression for anything said inside. Izuku had not called it a meeting. He had called it a check-in, which was accurate in the sense that all 4 of them checking in simultaneously was something that had not happened before. Lady Nagant was at her end of the table, which was an actual table they had acquired in the 2nd month, solid and scarred and impractical to move. Midnight was across from her with her tablet and 3 stacks of organized notes. Crane, who had declined a code name in favor of simply being called by her real name Hannah among the 4 of them, was leaning against the wall with her arms folded and her flight wings at rest, the feather-light constructs that extended from her shoulder blades when she chose to manifest them folded neatly like a bird in a church. Izuku was at the end of the table with his notebooks and his map and the expression he wore when he had been thinking about something for a long time and had arrived at a conclusion he was not completely comfortable with. "I want to be honest with you about the scope of what I've found," he said, without preamble. "Not because I want to alarm anyone, but because I think the work we do needs to be grounded in accurate information, and the information has expanded." He spread 3 documents across the table. They were printed on plain paper in a font small enough to require leaning in. "The Commission has been running a program for at least 20 years that targets specifically the heroes with the broadest public trust profiles and the most significant quirks for long-term management. Management in this context means a combination of financial dependency, contract structures that limit geographic and professional mobility, and, in cases where those methods are insufficient, more direct interventions. He paused. Kana's situation was not unusual. It was a standard escalation under the program. There are at least 14 documented cases in the records she brought that follow the same pattern. The room was quiet. 14 confirmed, Lady Nagant said. Suspected? Significantly more. The program's records aren't complete. I've reconstructed what I can from adjacent documentation. The figure I'd put on the total number of heroes who have been subjected to some version of this management protocol in the past 20 years is closer to 100. Hannah, from her position against the wall, said, the envelope payments. Where do they go? Multiple destinations. Some directly fund commission operations that are not in the public budget. Some go to individual administrators. Some, and this is the part I'm still working on, appear to go to third parties I haven't identified yet. He tapped the third document. This is the most important piece. There are hero agencies that are operating as direct subsidiaries of the Commission's management program. They're not just complicit in the payment structure. They were designed for it. Their entire function is to house heroes under conditions that maximize extraction. Midnight said, quietly, which agencies? He named 4. She recognized 2 of them. Her expression did not change, but her pen stopped moving. There are heroes in those agencies right now, she said. Yes. Heroes who don't know what those agencies are. Some of them don't know. Some of them suspect and have decided that the known quantity of what they have is preferable to the unknown quantity of what resistance might mean. And some of them know exactly what it is and have concluded that they have no viable alternative. He looked at each of them in turn. I want to change the third category first. Give people an alternative that's real enough to choose. And then? Lady Nagant asked. Then we work on the first 2 categories. In that order. Because you can't ask someone to leave a bad situation for nothing. You have to have somewhere to go. The rain intensified briefly overhead. A distant rumble that might have been thunder. Hannah unfolded her arms. So we're building the somewhere to go. We've already started, he said. What you're doing is the somewhere to go. The network of people who know the truth about what's happening and are choosing to operate outside the structures that make it possible. I'm not asking anyone to be a martyr. I'm asking people to work. To use what they know and what they can do in ways that the Commission cannot surveil or sanction, because we don't exist in the places they're looking. Midnight set down her pen. You've been building this for how long? Actively, 18 months. Watching and preparing before that. Alone? Yes. She looked at him steadily. He returned the look with the particular quality she had come to recognize in the weeks since she had joined the archive, the quality of someone who understood exactly what their situation was and had made a deliberate choice to be in it. What do you need from us? She said. Specifically. Not in general terms. He opened his notebook to a page that had been prepared, she realized, before this meeting. It was organized, precise, and had 3 columns, what he needed, who was best positioned to provide it, and what providing it would require of that person. He had thought about this carefully. He had thought about each of them. The column for Lady Nagant involved intelligence gathering and what he had labeled, with characteristic understatement, as field interventions. The column for Midnight involved curriculum design, network communication, and what he had labeled as institutional memory, which she understood to mean the 16 years of knowledge she carried about how the industry worked from the inside. The column for Hannah involved, primarily, aerial reconnaissance and the specific kind of ground-level intelligence that came from someone who had spent years operating in the gaps of the official response grid. Her own column, which she had looked at last because she had been aware of looking at the others first, said, analysis and coordination. Strategic planning. And, at the bottom, in writing slightly smaller than the rest, the part where someone makes sure I'm not missing things because I'm too close to them. She looked up from the notebook. This last item, she said. You want oversight. I want honesty, he said. I'm 17. I'm working on incomplete information in a domain where being wrong has significant consequences for people I care about. I need people who will tell me when I'm wrong, not people who will defer to me because I started this or because my quirk is useful. I need people who will argue with me. Lady Nagant said, "I've been arguing with you since I arrived." "I know. It's one of the most valuable things you've done." She almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely a movement. Midnight picked up her pen again. "All right," she said. "Let's go through the plan. From the beginning. And I want you to start with the parts you're least confident about." He turned to a new page in his notebook. He started with the parts he was least confident about. The rain drummed on. The city moved above them, enormous and luminous and entirely unaware of the conversation happening in its basement. Four people with notebooks and a hard drive and the combined weight of a great deal of accumulated understanding, deciding what to do with what they knew. The ghost appeared for the first time in public record 3 weeks later. A report filed by the Shinjuku Hero Agency's night response team noted an anomaly in the surveillance footage from a building where a licensed hero named Teruko Asahi, whose contract with the agency had been a source of private concern for her for 2 years, had been operating. The footage showed empty corridors. The report noted that several internal communication channels had been accessed by an unknown party and that certain documents, specifically the contractual appendices that govern Teruko Asahi's licensing payment obligations, were missing. Teruko Asahi had also resigned her agency position the following morning. Her resignation letter cited personal reasons. Her personal reasons were, in fact, a conversation that had lasted 40 minutes and a choice she had made with the full knowledge of what she was choosing. The Shinjuku agency filed a complaint with the commission. The commission opened an inquiry. The inquiry found no evidence of the intruder. The surveillance footage from the 40 minutes in question showed nothing. The motion sensors had not triggered. The access logs for the communication channels showed no unauthorized entry point. Someone, the inquiry concluded, had been there and left nothing behind. Not a footprint, not a fiber, not a frame of footage. As if they had been erased from the record before the record was made. The inquiry closed without a finding. In the notes of the lead investigator, buried in a section labeled Miscellaneous Observations, was a single line: "The hero Asahi says she does not recall meeting anyone. But she resigned with the confidence of someone who has been given good advice." 3 more heroes resigned from agency contracts in the following month. Each resignation was clean. Each investigation found nothing. In each case, the hero in question described, when asked, a certainty about their decision that they could not fully explain. The commission began using the word ghost in internal communications. The word was not inaccurate. But it missed the essential quality of what was happening, which was not haunting. It was not a ghost that lingers in rooms it has outgrown. It was something more like a key, finding the locks that nobody had admitted were there, turning them quietly and without ceremony, and leaving the doors open for whoever was ready to walk through. In a warehouse sublevel in Muzudafu, Izuku Midoriya read the commission inquiry report, which had been obtained through channels he was not going to specify, and made a note in his smallest handwriting in the margin of the page. The note said, "They're looking for a ghost. Let them keep looking. We are not a ghost. We are a record." He closed the notebook. He looked at the map on the wall, at the nodes and the connections, at the work that was still ahead. He was 18 years old and 11 weeks. There was a great deal left to do. The Ghost of the Industry. Act 2, The Weight of What Is Known. Chapter 6, The Commission Opens Its Eye. The man assigned to find the ghost was named Hiroshi Tanaka, and he had been working for the Hero Public Safety Commission for 22 years without once being asked to find something that could not be found. He had found embezzled funds and falsified quirk assessments. He had found heroes who had staged their own incidents for the footage. He had found a sidekick ring in Osaka that had been routing commission resources to a private security consortium for 4 years before anyone noticed the discrepancy. He had found all of it through the same method, patient analysis of the data trail that every human action leaves behind, because humans were not built for true concealment and eventually they made a mistake. He requested the ghost files on a Monday and spent the rest of the week reading them. By Friday afternoon he had identified the problem, which was not that the evidence was insufficient. The evidence was extraordinarily insufficient, in a pattern that was itself a kind of evidence. 11 incidents. 11 sets of surveillance records that were technically intact but contained no useful information. 11 motion sensor logs that showed normal ambient readings throughout the period in question. 11 access reports where the thing that had been accessed left no digital fingerprint. And 11 heroes who had resigned from their agencies with the particular quality of certainty that Tanaka associated not with impulsivity but with conclusion, with a person who has finished processing a decision and has no remaining doubts about it. He wrote his preliminary assessment in the careful, hedged language the commission preferred for findings that were not going to be comfortable to read. The subject, he wrote, operates with a level of sensory suppression that suggests a perceptual erasure quirk of significant power and precision. Standard surveillance infrastructure is ineffective by design, not by failure. The subject is not making mistakes because the subject understands the infrastructure well enough to avoid generating the kind of data that mistakes produce. This is not a villain. This is not an opportunist. This is someone who has studied the system carefully enough to know where its eyes are, and has built their operational pattern entirely in the spaces between them. He paused at his desk for a long time before writing the next line. The subject's targets are not random. Every hero who has resigned following an apparent ghost contact has been operating under contractual terms that fall in the highest quartile of restrictiveness in our current agency registry. The correlation is precise enough to suggest deliberate selection. The subject is not targeting heroes generally. The subject is targeting heroes who are most constrained by the structures we oversee. He did not submit that paragraph in the initial report. He held it for 3 days and looked at it in the evenings and thought about what it meant to write it, to make it officially legible to the institution he had served for 22 years. On the 4th day he submitted it, because he had always believed that the work required honesty about what you found, and he was not willing to begin omitting things now. The commission's response arrived in 48 hours. He was assigned a team of 4 analysts and a budget that told him the commission considered this matter significant. He was also, in a brief addendum that was technically an administrative note, reminded that the commission's operational security relied on the confidentiality of the contractual frameworks he had referenced in his assessment. He read the addendum twice. Then he filed it and began building his investigation map. He was good at his job. He had always been good at his job. And he understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has spent 22 years looking at the spaces between official accounts, that the next several months were going to require him to be honest with himself about which parts of his job he was still willing to do. The archive received the first indication that the commission had escalated their search on a Tuesday, through a channel that Izuku would not have had 18 months ago. The channel was a woman named Sato Hanako, who had been posting anonymously on hero industry forums for 3 years and who had, 6 weeks after the archive began operating, become something more than anonymous. She worked in the commission's licensing compliance division. She had access to administrative communications, scheduling systems, and the internal memo distribution network that connected the commission's regional offices. She had not been recruited in any traditional sense. She had, one evening, left a specific forum thread open on her personal device in a coffee shop that Izuku had identified from the IP pattern of her posting history, and he had sat 2 tables away, invisible, and read what she was reading. She had been reading the Izumi Kuroda case file. The real one, not the version in the official record. She had accessed it through a clearance level she was not supposed to have, using a pathway that had been misconfigured 3 years ago and never corrected. She had read it twice, from beginning to end, and when she closed it she had sat very still for a long time with her coffee going cold in front of her. He had slid a note across the table. She had startled violently. She had looked around the empty coffee shop, because it was empty from her perspective, and then looked at the note, which was a simple observation: you found the Kuroda file. There are 43 more like it. If you want to know where they are, leave the forum thread open on Thursday at the same time. She had left the thread open. They had begun a correspondence that was, technically, not a correspondence, since the messages left in the thread's draft folder under an account she set up for the purpose were never posted and the account had no identifying information. He taught her to use the draft folder method over the course of 2 weeks, and then he taught her 3 other methods, and she turned out to be an exceptionally capable learner. The Tuesday message said, new investigation team. For analysts, 1 senior investigator, name Hiroshi Tanaka. Budget authorization suggests priority 2, which is the 2nd highest classification. They have your pattern. They do not have your identity. They are building a geographic model. You should know this. Izuku read the message at 6 in the morning and sat with it for a while. A priority 2 authorization was not something he had expected this quickly. It told him the commission was more concerned than their public silence suggested, which made sense. 11 heroes had resigned from agency contracts. From the commission's perspective, that represented 11 revenue streams disrupted, 11 contracts voided, 11 elements of a carefully maintained system made uncertain. He wrote back, through the draft folder, "Thank you. Be careful with your access logs. Use the third pathway, not the second. The second has a new audit trigger as of last week." He closed the thread. He looked at his map. A geographic model meant they were plotting the incidents against each other, looking for a center of gravity. The incidents had been distributed carefully across 4 wards for exactly this reason. But a good analyst would eventually find a pattern even in a distribution designed to avoid one, because true randomness was impossible to manufacture. The human mind had preferences, routines, invisible tendencies. He looked at his map for a long time. Then he got up, put on his jacket, and went to find Lady Nagant. Chapter 7, Kana in the Field. The Meridian Hero Agency occupied the 17th through 22nd floors of a glass tower in the Chiyoda district, and its lobby featured a display case of hero memorabilia that included 3 provisional licenses belonging to heroes who were currently under the agency's management. Lady Nagant stood across the street from it on a gray morning and looked at the display case through the lobby windows and thought about the fact that provisional licenses in display cases was, in the language of people who chose to notice such things, a very specific kind of statement. It said, "We own the achievement." The hero stands inside it like a trophy in a case. The Meridian Agency was one of the 4 Izuku had named in the Shadow Council meeting. It was the smallest of the 4 and the one with the most legible paper trail, which made it the appropriate starting point. The approach for Meridian was different from the single hero extractions they had been doing. Meridian housed 12 heroes under contracts that Izuku had obtained through a source he was characteristically precise about, a former agency paralegal who had filed the contracts herself and retained copies because she had, as she put it, wanted to remember what she had been part of when she looked back on it. The paralegal had not known what she was handing the copies to. She had posted them in a dead drop she used for the forum where Sato Hanako also posted, believing she was communicating with a journalist collective she had been in contact with for a year. She was, in a sense, correct. The archive had absorbed the journalist collective's network 3 months ago, which was a story for another time. Lady Nagant's assignment was reconnaissance. Not action, not extraction, just the careful accumulation of a specific category of information that required physical presence to collect, the rhythms of the building, the patterns of who came and went, the texture of the relationship between the agency's administrative staff and the heroes they were supposedly supporting. Paper trails told you what had been done. Presence told you how people felt about it. She had been coming to this street corner for 5 mornings in succession, a different appearance each time, which was something she had been doing since her commission days and was one of the skills she had not lost along with the things she had preferred to lose. She had watched the morning patterns, which heroes arrived under their own power, which ones arrived in agency vehicles, which ones moved with the particular quality of freedom and which ones moved with the quality of people who had somewhere specific to be that they had not chosen. On the 3rd morning she had identified 4 of the 12. On the 4th morning she had identified 7. On the 5th morning, which was today, she was watching the 8th, a woman named Rika Shimizu, Pro Hero Vantage, whose quirk was telescopic vision enhancement and who arrived every morning at 7:48 on the agency's transport van despite living, according to the residential records she had checked, 8 minutes walk from the building. The transport van mattered because it meant Vantage was being managed at the level of her daily commute. The agency was controlling not just her assignments and her contracts but the texture of her daily existence, the path she took to work, the time she spent in transit with other agency heroes, the conversations she had in a vehicle the agency owned and could, if it chose to, monitor. Lady Nagant wrote this down in the notebook she was carrying and walked to the coffee stand on the corner and bought something she did not intend to drink and continued watching. At 8:15, a hero she had not yet identified came out of the agency's side entrance and stood on the pavement for 3 minutes without going anywhere. He was young, younger than most of the others she had logged, and the thing he was doing, which was standing still on a pavement at 8:15 in the morning looking at the sky, had a quality she recognized. He was taking a moment. One moment, carefully measured, in which he was not doing the thing that the schedule required and the agency approved and the contract enabled. She looked at him and understood that he was one of the ones who knew exactly what the situation was and had concluded they had no viable alternative. She had been in that category herself, longer than she liked to admit. She did not approach him. The approach would come, if it came, when Izuku had built enough of the alternative to offer it credibly. For now she watched and she recorded and she walked back to the archive with a notebook full of observations that were going to matter. She spread the notes on the table that evening while Izuku read them. He had a way of reading that she had come to know well in the months they had been working together, very still, moving his lips slightly, occasionally making a small mark in the margin with the green pen that was apparently a permanent fixture of his person. He looked up when he reached the section about the young hero on the pavement. Kento Ida, he said. Pro-hero Rampart. His quirk generates temporary hardened barriers from ambient atmospheric matter. He's been with Meridian for 2 years. He paused. His contract has a geographic lock. He can't take assignments outside the greater Tokyo area without agency approval, which the agency has declined to grant 8 times in the past 14 months. She looked at him. You already have his file. I have all 12 files. The paralegal was thorough. He set down her notebook. The geographic lock matters because he's originally from Sendai and his family is there. The agency is using proximity to family as a retention mechanism. Keep someone close enough to home to maintain the emotional connection, far enough from autonomy to prevent exit. Lady Nagant absorbed this. That's very precise. The contracts are very precise. That's the thing people don't understand about what the extractive agencies do. It's not crude. It's not obvious from the outside. The language of the contracts is perfectly legal. Every individual term is defensible. The effect of the terms in combination is something that requires significant analysis to fully articulate, which is exactly the point. It's designed to be difficult to explain to someone who hasn't seen it clearly. He had spoken about this before, in various forms, and each time she had heard it differently. Tonight she heard the frustration that lived under the analysis, the part of him that had been studying this system since he was 16 and had accumulated enough understanding to be genuinely angry about it, which he expressed almost exclusively by working harder and more precisely. The plan for Meridian, she said. We make contact with the 12 individually, he said. Not simultaneously. In an order based on who is most ready to receive the information and what the information requires them to do. The ones who know exactly what they're in and have decided they have no alternative go first. They're the ones who just need to see that the alternative is real. He looked at the map. Rampart is in that category. He goes first. And you want to make the contact. I want to make all the initial contacts for Meridian. The quirk is most useful in the approach phase. Once trust is established, I'll bring in whoever makes the most sense for the ongoing relationship. He paused. I need you to run counter-surveillance during the contacts. The Commission's investigation is accelerating. I can't guarantee they don't have physical presence in the Chiyoda district given the Meridian file. She looked at him steadily. You read Sato's message this morning. Priority 2. For analyst and Hiroshi Tanaka, who has the best record in the Commission's investigative division. He said it without apparent concern, but she had learned to read the quality of his silences, and this particular pause had a shape to it. We need to be more careful. Not slower. More careful. There's a difference. There is. Slower helps them. More careful helps us. She nodded. She picked up the notebook and tucked it into her jacket. I'll be in position by 7 tomorrow morning. 6:30, he said. He goes to a bakery on the north side of the block before work. He's always alone. She stopped at the door. You've been watching him for a while. I've been watching everyone in Meridian for a while. He looked up from the notebook. I want to make sure what I offer them is real enough to choose. That requires knowing them well enough to offer something real. She thought about the young hero on the pavement, 3 minutes of sky watching measured against the weight of a geographic lock and a contract that had been designed to make exit seem impossible. She thought about the note that had been taped to the wall outside her cell in Tartarus. Someone had thought about the fact that she would be hungry. 6:30, she said, and left. Chapter 8, The Bakery on Kinjo Street. The bakery was called Morningside and it opened at 6 and it made, in Izuku's considered opinion, the best curry bread in the Chiyoda district, which was a data point he had confirmed through personal consumption over 5 separate visits. The owner was a woman in her 60s who had been running the place for 30 years and who did not remember the quiet young man who came in occasionally and always paid an exact change, which was the intended effect. Kento Ida arrived at 6:41. He was 23, broad-shouldered in the way that people with physical output quirks tended to be, with close-cropped dark hair and the particular quality of controlled energy that Izuku associated with people who had trained themselves to take up less space than their bodies naturally wanted to. He ordered the same thing every day, which the owner confirmed in the casual way of someone describing a regular customer, and he sat at the window counter and ate slowly and looked at the street with the expression of someone who was taking inventory of a life. Izuku sat at the counter 2 seats down, visible, which was different from his usual approach and had required a specific decision. The approach for Rampart could not be the appear-from-nothing method he had used with Lady Nagant and Midnight. It needed to be gentler, more ordinary, because Kento Ida was not someone who had been broken by the system in ways that made dramatic revelation feel appropriate. He was someone who was being slowly compressed by it, and the response to slow compression was not a sudden shock. It was a widening of space. He waited until Kento was midway through his bread and looking at the street with comfortable detachment before he said, conversationally and without looking up from his own food, the geographic lock on a Meridian contract can be challenged through the third-tier licensing appeals process. Most people don't know the process exists because the Commission removed it from the public documentation in the last regulatory update. But it's still in the statute. A pause. He felt rather than saw Kento go still. It's a slow process, Izuku continued, at the same conversational volume. 6 to 8 months if the agency contests it, which they would. But during the appeals period the geographic restriction is suspended by default, which would give you freedom of movement while the case was pending. Another pause. That's enough time to establish a meaningful presence in Sendai without the agency being able to prevent it contractually. Kento said, carefully, who are you? Someone who read your contract. Izuku looked up from his food and met the other man's eyes directly. He had learned, over the months of these contacts, that the moment of direct eye contact was the moment that determined the direction of everything that followed. He made sure his own expression was clear and free of anything that could be read as threat or performance. I'm not from any agency. I'm not from the Commission. I'm not a journalist. I'm someone who has been paying attention to what Meridian's contracts do to the people inside them, and who thinks you deserve to know what options actually exist. Kento studied him for a long moment. He had a careful face, the face of someone who had learned to assess information before responding to it. You said most people don't know the appeals process exists. The Commission removed it from the public documentation in the regulatory update 18 months ago. The removal was not announced and was not subject to the public comment period that regulatory changes normally require, because it was classified as a formatting update rather than a substantive change. The statute remains. Only the public access to information about the statute was altered. That's Kento stopped. It's a precise and deliberate obscuring of available recourse, Izuku said. Yes. Another silence. The owner moved behind the counter, rearranging the morning pastries with the practiced efficiency of long repetition. Why are you telling me this? Kento said. Because you've been standing outside your agency's building for 30 seconds every morning looking at the sky, and that is the specific body language of someone who is maintaining a very careful internal balance, and I think you deserve to know that the balance doesn't have to be maintained indefinitely. He said it with the same quality he tried to put into everything he said in these conversations, honesty without pressure. Information offered, not instructions given. I'm not asking you to do anything right now. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm giving you information that belongs to you because it directly concerns your professional situation, and I'm going to pay for my coffee and leave, and if you decide you want to talk further there is a way to do that. He slid a card across the counter. It had a single string of numbers on it that looked like a serial code and was not. The numbers are a forum thread address, he said. The method for accessing it is in the third line of the publicly available appeals process statute, if you look at the initial letters of each word. He paid for his coffee and his bread. He left the bakery. He became invisible half a block away and walked to the counter-surveillance position Lady Nagant had established at the north end of the street, and she gave him a small nod that meant the block was clear. How did it go? She said. He's thinking about it. That's the right response. Izuku tucked his hands into his pockets. He'll find the statute. He'll read it. And then he'll realize that the removal from public documentation was not an accident, and that's the moment when the picture changes. The moment he realizes the removal was deliberate. The moment the system stops being the background and starts being a choice that was made. He looked at the bakery window from a distance. Kento Ida was sitting at the counter with the card in his hand. That's the moment that changes everything. Not for everyone. But for people like him. They walked back toward the station in the early morning gray, and Izuku was quiet in the way he got when he was running calculations, and Lady Nagant did not interrupt it, because she had learned the difference between his silences. This one was the kind that meant things were moving. The thread was accessed 9 hours later. Izuku was working through commission financial records when the notification arrived, a simple flag in a monitoring system he had built from publicly available components and considerable patience. He opened the thread. The message was brief, which he had expected. People who were carefully considering their options did not write long first messages. It said, "The statute is real. The removal was real. I need to understand who you are before I understand anything else." He considered his response for several minutes. He had the same conversation with himself that he had before each of these responses, which was the conversation about transparency, how much to give, in what order, at what pace. The answer was always the same and never simple. Enough to be credible. Not so much that trust was replaced by obligation. He wrote back, "My name is Izuku. I'm not a hero or an official of any kind. I'm 18 years old and I've been studying the contractual infrastructure of the hero industry for 2 years because I believed what I found was important enough to act on. I am not asking you to believe I'm trustworthy. I'm asking you to evaluate the information on its merits, and if you find it accurate, to consider what accurate information is worth to you." He sent it. He went back to the financial records. The response came at midnight. He was the only one still awake in the archive sublevel. The response said, "I verified the statute. I verified the removal date. I verified 3 other things you implied without stating. They're all real. I want to meet." He wrote back, "Thursday. The bakery. I'll find you." And then, because he thought it was true and because the kind of person who accessed a hidden forum thread at midnight and verified 3 unstated implications was the kind of person for whom small truths had weight, "I think you already knew something was wrong. I'm sorry it took this long for someone to confirm it." The response, when it came, was a single word. It said, "Yes." Chapter 9, What Midnight Builds. The curriculum that Namuri Kiyama designed for the archive was not a hero training curriculum. It was something considerably more difficult to categorize, which was, she had concluded, its primary advantage. Categories made things easy to find and easy to shut down. A thing without a clear category was much harder to look for. She called it, in her own notes, situated practice. The name came from an academic tradition she had encountered during her graduate studies, before she had taken the practical path, and which described learning that was embedded in actual context rather than abstracted from it. She had spent her years at UA trying to import this approach into a curriculum that was fundamentally designed for abstraction. Now, without the curriculum's constraints, she could build what she had always wanted to build. The materials took 3 forms. The first was a series of written guides, distributed through the forum network in fragments that looked, individually, like general professional development content. Together they formed a comprehensive map of the hero industry's contractual landscape, what the standard terms meant, what the non-standard terms meant, what recourse existed under each, and what the limits of that recourse were. She wrote them in the clearest language she could manage, which was very clear, because 16 years of teaching had given her an extensive education in the difference between explanation that was technically accurate and explanation that was actually useful. The second form was live instruction, conducted through a method Izuku had constructed from 3 different encrypted communication platforms woven together in a way that produced a functional audio channel without requiring any of the participants to be in the same space. It was not as good as a classroom. It was considerably better than nothing. She had 12 students in the first cohort, none of whom knew each other's identities, all of whom were current or former heroes or hero-adjacent professionals who had been identified through the network as people who would use the information well. The third form was what she thought of as the living archive. Every piece of documented evidence, every verified case file, every statute and regulatory record the archive had collected, organized into a system she had designed with the same philosophy she brought to her syllabi. You should be able to find what you need quickly, and what you need should be connected to other things you might need in ways that illuminate the connections. She was working on the Living Archive's organizational structure on an afternoon in late May when Hannah came in from a reconnaissance flight and sat down across from her and said, without preamble, I found something. Hannah had the quality of economy that came from years of operating alone in the spaces between the official response grid. She did not narrate her observations. She delivered them, and she delivered them accurately, which made her one of Namuri's favorite people to receive information from. There is a building in the Sumida ward, Hannah said. Private. No public listing. The signage says it's a therapeutic facility, but the hours and the traffic pattern are wrong for therapeutic use. I've done 3 flyovers. The pattern matches a residential program of some kind. Heroes go in. Some of them come out looking different from when they went in. Namuri set down her stylus. Different how? Less. The word I keep coming back to is less. Less present. Less whatever they were before. Hannah's expression was careful and precise. I've seen it before. Not in Heroes specifically. But I've seen it. Namuri had a 15-year body of knowledge about the Commission's programs and their applications. She sat with what Hannah was describing and moved pieces around in her mind until a pattern assembled itself that she recognized, not from personal experience but from the case files. A behavioral adjustment program, she said slowly. Is that what they're called? Internally, I think the Commission refers to them as stabilization facilities. The ones that have been mentioned in the documents we've seen. I didn't know any of them were still operational. She reached for her tablet. The documents we have from Kana's hard drive mention 2 such facilities. One in Hokkaido, one in Saitama. The Sumida building isn't in either document. Either the document is incomplete, or this one is newer, Hannah said. Or it operates under a different administrative classification. Namuri pulled up the file index and began moving quickly through it. I need to tell Izuku. This is the most significant physical location we've identified in the Commission's operational structure. If we can confirm what it is and document it properly, it changes the evidentiary picture significantly. I know where he is, Hannah said. He's meeting the second Meridian contact today. The woman, Vantage. Namuri looked up. Is he taking the soft approach with her or the direct one? He said soft. She's been in Meridian for 4 years and her public profile is significant enough that any visible disruption to her situation would be picked up. Namuri nodded. She looked at the tablet and then at the map on the wall and then at Hannah, who was still sitting with the particular stillness of someone who has not yet finished what they came to say. There's more, Namuri said. One of the heroes I saw going into the Sumida building, Hannah said carefully, I recognized. I've been watching the Meridian building for 2 weeks and I recognized the walk. The way they moved. The Meridian heroes have very specific body language from being managed that closely and I've been watching it long enough to know it. One of the 12. Yes. One of the 12 went into that building last Thursday and came out on Friday morning and has not left the Meridian building in 9 days since. Hana paused. Before, she left every morning at 7. Coffee. She walked a specific route. She had a rhythm. The rhythm is gone. The room was quiet. Which one? Namuri said. Hana told her. Namuri was already reaching for her jacket. Chapter 10, The Sumida Building. Izuku received Midnight's message during the meeting with Rika Shimizu, which he was conducting in a park near the Chiyoda Tower during Vantage's approved lunch period, and which had been going well in the specific way that difficult conversations go well when both participants are treating the difficulty honestly. He read the message once. He continued the conversation with Vantage for another 8 minutes, completing the essential information transfer and establishing the thread contact method, because she had shown up and she deserved his full attention and he was not going to shortchange her. Then he excused himself and called Midnight on the secure channel. "Tell me everything," he said. She did. He listened without interrupting, which was his practice when receiving field intelligence, because interruptions produced gaps. When she finished he was quiet for 6 seconds, which she had learned meant he was running a full analysis, not being slow. "The hero," he said. "Her name is Saika Watanabe. Pro-hero Lumen. Her quirk is light-based augmentation, flash suppression, illumination generation. She's been with Meridian for 3 years. Her contract has a behavioral compliance clause that the other 11 contracts don't have. I flagged it when I first read the files and didn't fully understand what it was for." A pause. "Now I do. The behavioral adjustment program," Midnight said. "They use it on heroes who resist. Not aggressively, not with obvious violations, just who demonstrate patterns of non-compliance that the agency's metrics identify as risk factors. The clause gives the agency contractual authority to require participation in a commission-affiliated wellness program at their discretion." His voice was level. "It's framed as a benefit. Included in the contract as a mental health support provision. It's consensual in the technical sense that she signed the contract." Midnight was quiet. "She signed before she knew what it was," she said. "Everyone signs before they know what it is. That's the design." She heard the thing beneath his level voice, the thing he kept underneath the analysis because the analysis was useful and the thing beneath it could not be if it ran free. She had been teaching long enough to recognize the specific emotional weight of someone who has understood a harm clearly enough to be genuinely angry about it and has chosen to put the anger somewhere it can do work. "What do we do?" she said. "We document the building. We identify who is running the program and under what commission authorization. And we get Saika Watanabe out of there before whatever they are doing to her is finished." Another pause. "I need to know the timeline." Hana said she's been inside for 9 days. "Yes. The programs and the documents run for 2 to 3 weeks. If the Sumida facility follows the same timeline, we have between 5 and 12 days. That's a very wide range." "I know. I need Hana to do closer observation tonight. Not a flyover. Ground level. And I need to be inside the building." "Izuku. I know what I'm asking," he said. "I've been inside more difficult facilities. I'll be invisible the entire time. I need to see the layout, the staffing, the access points. You can't plan an extraction from aerial observation." She thought about arguing. She had argued with him 3 times in the months since she had joined the archive, and twice she had been right and once he had been right, and the one time he had been right it had been about exactly this kind of situation, which was operations that required doing a thing that was risky in order to prevent a thing that was worse. "Tomorrow night," she said. "Not tonight. Tonight we establish observation. You sleep tonight." A pause that she recognized as him calculating whether the sleep was worth the delay. "Tomorrow night," he agreed. The Sumida building at 3 in the morning was doing what well-maintained institutional buildings do at 3 in the morning, which was demonstrating that its security was thorough and its routines were reliable. Izuku spent 40 minutes on the perimeter before he entered, invisible and patient, mapping the camera coverage, the guard positions, the access control points. He had done this work in Tartarus and in 3 agency buildings and in the Commission's regional office in Narima, and each time the work was different in its specifics and the same in its essential character. The architecture of control always told you something about what it was designed to contain. What the Sumida building was designed to contain, he concluded as he moved through its corridors at 3:15 in the morning, was not danger. The security was oriented inward in a way that told a very specific story. The cameras were positioned to monitor the building's interior spaces, not its perimeter. The guard rotations covered the residential floors. The access control was most sophisticated at the point between the residential section and the parts of the building where the residents might otherwise want to go. It was a facility designed to keep people in, not to keep people out. He moved through the residential section carefully. The doors were standard institutional with electronic locks. The rooms beyond them, visible through the narrow window panels at eye level, were adequate in the way that spaces become when adequacy is the measure being applied. They were clean, well lit at appropriate hours, furnished with the components of ordinary life arranged in the specific way that ordinary life becomes when it is being administered rather than lived. He found Saika Watanabe in the room at the end of the east corridor. He had not known her before the files. He knew her from the files, 26 years old, for years with Meridian, professional record that included an unusual concentration of high-difficulty rescue operations in which she had been specifically noted for improvisation under constraint, which was a skill set that sometimes made agencies nervous. He had read her performance reviews, which were excellent, and her behavioral compliance flags, which were not. She was awake at 3:15 in the morning, sitting on the edge of her bed, looking at the wall with an expression that he recognized because he had seen it before, on different faces in different circumstances. It was the expression of someone who is working very hard to maintain the integrity of a self that external pressure is trying to reshape. He was visible before he had consciously decided to be. He made the choice quickly, quietly, standing outside the window panel of her door, because the alternative was watching her sit alone with that expression and not letting her know that she was not invisible to everyone who was looking. She saw him and went still. He put his finger to his lips. He held up the notebook, open to a blank page, and wrote on it with the green pen, pressing it against the glass so she could read, "I am not from this facility. I am not from Meridian. I am going to get you out. I need you to trust me for 72 hours and do nothing differently until I come back." She read it twice. She looked at him with the particular quality of assessment that people who have been managing a situation carefully apply when something changes in it. She nodded once. He wrote, "I'll be back. You have not met me." He held up the page until she nodded again. Then he turned the page and wrote one more thing, because it was true and because she needed to know it was true. "What they are doing here is not who you are. You're still you." She looked at that for a long time. Then she lay back on the bed and closed her eyes, and he watched her breathing slow into something that was not sleep but was resting, which was different from what she had been doing before, and he took that as the answer it was. He left the building the way he had entered. He was 3 blocks away before he stopped and wrote in his notebook, in the dark, in the smallest handwriting he could manage. He wrote, 5 days. No more. Chapter 11, Tanaka's Map. Hiroshi Tanaka's investigation map was a large printed geographic overlay of the Tokyo metropolitan area with a secondary layer showing the distribution of hero agency facilities, commission offices, and the 11 incident sites where the ghost had been active. He had pinned it to the wall of the conference room the commission had given his team, and he spent 20 minutes every morning looking at it before he looked at anything else. The map was telling him something that he was not yet able to articulate precisely, which meant it was the most important thing in the room. He had been an analyst for 22 years. He had learned, over those years, the specific feeling of a pattern that was present but not yet visible, the way a shape hides in a figure until your eye finds the right angle. The map had that feeling. He looked at it every morning and waited. On the 23rd morning, the angle changed. He had been looking at the incident sites as endpoints, the places where the ghost had acted. What he had not looked at carefully enough was the transit between them. The incident sites were spread across 4 wards in a distribution that had seemed deliberately random. And the distribution was deliberately random. He had confirmed this through the analysis his team had done of the geographic spread. But the spread was not random in the same way everywhere. There was a region, bounded loosely by the edges of two ward boundaries and the river, where the randomization was slightly more concentrated than elsewhere. Not by much. But enough, if you were looking at the right layer. He stood in front of the map for 40 minutes, which was not the kind of thing his team was accustomed to seeing from him. His analyst, a young woman named Yui who had been with the commission for 3 years and who had the sharpest pattern recognition he had encountered since his own early career, eventually came to stand beside him without asking what he was looking at. The concentration, she said after a while. You see it. I've been seeing it for a week. I didn't want to say it because I wasn't sure if I was pattern matching onto a distribution that was genuinely random. You weren't. The Kolmogorov-Smirnov test on the distribution has been bothering me since Wednesday. It's not significant. But it's directional. Directional toward? He put his finger on the map. It was not pointing at a specific building. It was pointing at a region. The region contained, by his count, 43 commercial and industrial facilities of various types, any one of which could, in principle, serve the purpose his professional instincts were suggesting the ghost needed. Somewhere to work from, he said. Not a residence. Too much operational activity for a residence. Something larger, less visible, less connected to personal identity. Yui looked at the region. That's a lot of buildings. It is. He stepped back from the map. We're not going to search them. If the ghost is operating at the level of sophistication the surveillance record suggests, a physical search of that area would be detected and the operation would move before we found anything. He looked at the map for another moment. What we're going to do is give them a reason to contact someone in that region. Something that looks like an opportunity and creates a need to communicate. Yui was quiet for a moment. That's a provocation strategy. It's an information exchange strategy. We're not trying to arrest anyone. We're trying to understand what we're dealing with. He turned away from the map. Pulled a full list of hero contract terminations in the past 8 months. Cross-reference with agency complaint filings and commission inquiry openings. I want to see if there's a pattern in the heroes the ghost has contacted that we haven't mapped yet. She went to do it. He stayed at the map. He was looking at the region he had identified, at the 43 buildings, and thinking about the fact that what the ghost had been doing was not easy. It required resources, intelligence infrastructure, and people. It required more than one person. He had suspected this for some time and was increasingly certain of it. An operation requiring more than one person had more than one vulnerability. He was not certain what he was going to do with the vulnerabilities once he found them. He had been thinking about that question for 3 weeks and had not arrived at a comfortable answer. He had arrived at several answers that were technically within his mandate and none of them felt comfortable. He went back to his desk. He opened the file he had been building on the hero contract terminations. He began to read. The file, by the end of the day, had a shape he had not expected. He had expected to find a pattern of vulnerability, heroes who had been in difficult financial situations, heroes whose public profiles were declining, heroes who were professionally isolated and therefore susceptible to outside influence. This was the standard profile for successful recruitment of heroes away from legitimate structures. What he found instead was a pattern of integrity. The heroes the ghost had contacted, as best he could reconstruct from the 11 confirmed departures plus the secondary network of forum activity and anonymous industry discussion that his team had been building a picture of, were not primarily characterized by vulnerability. They were primarily characterized by a specific quality that his professional vocabulary gave him several names for and that he finally settled on calling, in his private notes, moral clarity. They were heroes who had been paying attention. Heroes whose performance records showed a consistent pattern of doing the work that needed to be done regardless of whether it was the work that the cameras were following. Heroes who had filed internal complaints, who had written critical assessments of agency practices, who had sought out information about their contractual rights. Heroes who had, in various ways and at various costs, declined to stop noticing what was happening around them. He sat at his desk for a long time after this finding assembled itself fully in his mind. He looked at the file with its careful documentation, the work of a disciplined investigator, and he thought about what it meant to be a disciplined investigator in service of an institution whose practices were producing the pattern he was looking at. He thought about the paragraph he had almost not submitted in his initial report. He thought about 22 years. He closed the file. He looked at the wall of his office, which was bare, which he preferred to the map in the conference room. He looked at the bare wall for a while. Then he opened a different file. This one was labeled, with the administrative nomenclature that made such things look routine, Investigative Method Review, Operation Ghost. He began to write in it. He wrote carefully and in detail, and what he wrote was not a progress report. It was a reckoning. Chapter 12, The Extraction of Lumen. The extraction plan for Saika Watanabe had 7 components and 2 contingencies and was built on the same principle as all of Izuku's plans, which was that the most sophisticated approach was the one that created the least disruption while producing the most complete change in situation. Disruption was memorable. Disruption left traces. Disruption was, in the vocabulary of his particular method, the enemy of clean outcomes. Component 1 was Hana, who had spent 3 days in close ground-level observation of the Sumida building and had produced a patrol timing map accurate to within 90 seconds. Component 2 was Midnight, who had spent those same 3 days researching the Commission's Wellness Program Authorization Framework and had identified the specific legal provision under which the Sumida facility operated, which was a provision designed for voluntary residential programs and which required, buried in the enabling statute at subsection 7 paragraph 3, that participants be able to confirm voluntary status on request to any licensed pro-hero. The provision has never been enforced, Midnight had said when she presented it. Because no one has ever tested it. But it's there, and it's there because when the program was designed someone on the Commission's legal team was covering their institutional basis, and the coverage creates a mechanism. Component 3 was Lady Nagant, who was going to be visible. This was the unusual element and the one she had taken longest to agree to. Being visible meant being potentially identified. It meant the Commission's investigation, already accelerating, having a confirmed piece of the archive's personnel to work with. It meant risk. Why me, she had said. Because the provision requires a licensed pro-hero to make the request, Izuku had said. Your license is technically still active. Tartarus revoked it administratively, but the revocation was never processed through the full disciplinary board procedure, which means it's legally contested. A pause. I know this is a significant ask. You've been building toward this for 3 weeks. I've been building toward getting Saika Watanabe out of that building, he said. The method evolved when Midnight found the statute. I'm not going to pretend the method doesn't carry a cost for you. She had been quiet for a long time. Then she had said, what happens to her if we don't? He had told her what the Commission's documents described happening in the stabilization programs, in language that was very specific and very careful and left nothing vague that might be comforting to leave vague. All right, she had said. The extraction happened on a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon, which was the most counterintuitive timing in the plan and therefore the most important. 2 in the afternoon was when institutional facilities were at their most routine, when the staff's attention was at its natural midday dispersal, when the administrative systems were running background processes and the human element of security was in its least alert configuration. Lady Nagant walked in through the front entrance. She did not attempt concealment. She was wearing civilian clothes, nothing that suggested heroics, and she carried herself with the particular quality that long experience in professional environments produces. She looked like she was supposed to be there. She approached the reception desk and spoke to the administrator there in a tone that was pleasant and absolutely firm. I'm here to invoke the voluntary status confirmation provision for a participant in this program, she said. The participant's name is Saika Watanabe. I'm a licensed pro-hero and the statute requires you to facilitate the confirmation within 1 hour of request. I'd like to begin the process. The administrator looked at her. There was a moment that stretched. In institutional facilities, moments like this went one of 2 ways, someone called a supervisor, or someone called security. The difference between these outcomes depended on whether the staff member across the desk believed the person speaking knew what they were talking about. Lady Nagant had spent 11 years producing this belief in people who would have preferred not to believe her, and she produced it now. The administrator called a supervisor. While the supervisor was being called, Izuku was moving through the east corridor of the residential floor, invisible, and Hana was positioned on the roof of the adjacent building with sightlines to 3 of the facility's exits, and Midnight was 40 meters up the street in a coffee shop with a direct view of the building's main entrance and a phone connected to a criminal law firm whose senior partner had been briefed, 3 days ago, on exactly what kind of emergency call they might receive. Today, the supervisor arrived and reviewed Lady Nagant's cited provision. The supervisor's expression moved through several recognizable stages: confident dismissal, research, uncertainty, something that might have been the specific discomfort of someone who has just realized that a piece of institutional process that was supposed to be invisible has become visible. This provision is highly unusual, the supervisor said. It's in the statute, Lady Nagant said. Subsection 7, paragraph 3. The 1-hour window begins at the time of first request. I made the request 7 minutes ago. The supervisor made a phone call. Izuku heard this from the east corridor, which had an intercom connection to the administrative section that he had identified during his initial reconnaissance, and adjusted his timing accordingly. The phone call was to the Commission's compliance office, which was the expected escalation and the one the plan had accounted for. The Commission's compliance office would need to verify the provision, which would take time, and time was the extraction's most important resource. He reached Saika Watanabe's room at 2:17. She was sitting on her bed, fully dressed, which told him she had been ready. He became visible in the corridor and opened the door with the access card he had lifted from the facility's maintenance office during his reconnaissance visit, and he looked at her and said, quietly, "Now." She stood up. She did not take anything from the room except a small notebook, which she tucked into her jacket, and she came to the door with the walk of someone who has been very carefully conserving themselves and is now prepared to be used. They moved through the east corridor at the pace that institutional corridors permit, which is faster than a walk and slower than anything that attracts attention. Hana had identified the south service exit as the lowest traffic egress point. They reached it in 4 minutes. Izuku pushed it open and they were in the alley behind the building, and then they were walking up the alley toward the street, and Hana dropped from the adjacent rooftop 30 meters ahead of them and fell into step without a word, and the 3 of them turned north onto the main street and were absorbed into the ordinary mid-afternoon movement of the city. Behind them, the supervisor was still on the phone with the Commission's compliance office, and Lady Nagant was still in the reception area, pleasantly and firmly requesting a timeline for the voluntary status confirmation process. She left the building at 2:43, when it became clear that the compliance office's verification was going to take longer than the afternoon, and she was a block away when her phone showed the message from Izuku that said, "Clean." She stopped walking for 3 seconds. She breathed. Then she continued, because the work was not done and the street was not a place for stillness. She texted back, "Good." 1 word. It was enough. Saika Watanabe sat in the archives warehouse sublevel that evening and looked at the people around her, and the people around her looked back with the quality of attention she had not received in a very long time from a professional context, which was the quality of simply seeing her as a person rather than an asset or a risk or a compliance concern. She had not been fully briefed yet. Izuku had told her there would be time for the full picture, that she did not need to absorb everything at once, that the first evening was for rest and for the particular kind of quiet that follows an extraction that has cost something. "The notebook you brought," he said, nodding at the jacket pocket where she had tucked it. "Do you want to talk about it or would you prefer I don't ask?" She looked at him. Then she took the notebook out and set it on the table in front of her. "They have a journaling component," she said. "In the program. They encourage participants to write down their thoughts. They describe it as a processing tool." She paused. "I wrote what they wanted me to write in the sessions. In this I wrote what was actually true. I've been keeping it for the whole 9 days." He looked at the notebook and then at her. "Are you willing to let us read it? Not for intelligence purposes. For the documentary record. What you experienced and what you observed about the program's methods is evidence of a category we don't have first-hand testimony for yet." She thought about it for a moment. Then she nodded. "I want to understand what happened to me," she said. "Fully. Not the version they were constructing. The real one." She looked at Midnight, who had come in an hour after the others and was sitting at the edge of the table with the expression of someone who has spent a career understanding what people need. I know who you are. Kayama-san. I had you for a seminar. Guest lecture, my second year. Midnight looked at her with recognition. I remember. You asked about the difference between heroics as profession and heroics as vocation. You said the difference was who chose the work and who the work chose, and that the industry preferred the first category even though the second was better at it. A small pause. They used that against me. In the program. They said that the reason I had trouble with agency compliance was because I had made an identity out of hero work and needed to develop a healthier relationship with professional boundaries. She said this in a carefully level voice. They were trying to make me into the first category. The room was quiet. They weren't going to succeed, Midnight said. No, Saika said. But they were going to try for another week at least. She looked at Izuku. There are others in that building. 3 more, at least. I don't know their names. I know, he said. Can you get them out? That's what we're going to work on next, he said. It was not a promise, because he had learned not to make promises about things that were not yet certain. But the way he said it was the way of someone for whom the intention had already acquired the weight of commitment. She looked at him for a moment. She picked up her notebook and held it. I want to help, she said. I know, he said. Rest first. Then we'll talk about what help looks like. She nodded. Midnight brought her tea, which was the most practical thing and the most human thing, and the archive sublevel was quiet for a while with the particular quality of quiet that lives on the other side of a long difficulty, the kind that has not ended but has shifted, and in the shifting made something more possible than it was before. Chapter 13, 17 Pieces of a Larger Picture. Sato Hanako sent her message at 11:15 on a Thursday night, which was outside their normal communication window, which meant something had changed in the commission's posture. Izuku was awake, as he frequently was at 11:15, and read it within 3 minutes. The message was longer than her usual communications. She had developed, over the months of their correspondence, a very efficient style, short and factual. When her messages were long it was because the facts were numerous and she had determined that abbreviation would compromise accuracy. The message said, Tanaka filed an internal document 2 days ago under the method review category that should have been routine. It went to his direct supervisor and should have gone no further. It went further. The document has been escalated to the deputy director level. I don't have the content. I have the routing path and the escalation designation, which is confidential elevated. The deputy director has scheduled a meeting with Tanaka for Monday morning. The only other people who have been given confidential elevated status on this investigation are Tanaka, his supervisor, the Director of Internal Affairs, and the Deputy Director. This is not a routine escalation. Something in the document changed the shape of the investigation at a level above normal priority 2 handling. He read it twice. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. He wrote back, thank you. Use the 4th pathway for the next 2 weeks. Not the 3rd. And then, are you safe? Her reply came back in 4 minutes, I think so. I'm careful. He wrote, I know you are. But be more careful. He did not go back to the commission financial records he had been working on. He opened his analysis notebook instead, the one with the pale green cover that he used for thinking rather than recording, and he wrote at the top of a fresh page, what does Tanaka know? He thought about it for a long time. He thought about the shape of the investigation from the outside, what it would look like to a skilled analyst working from the data the commission had available. He thought about the incident sites and the distribution pattern he had designed and whether a 22-year analyst would have found the slight concentration in the boundary region. He thought about the hero profile, the pattern of moral clarity he had been selecting for and whether that pattern was legible from the outside. He thought about 11 weeks of careful work and what an analyst who was very good at their job could have assembled from 11 weeks of careful work. He wrote in the notebook, he's close to the operational geography. Probable. He's identified the network character, heroes who pay attention, heroes who resist. Possible. He's identified the multi-person structure of the operation. Likely, given the complexity of the Sumida extraction. He has a theory about the archive's location that is directionally accurate. Unknown. He looked at what he had written. Then he wrote, underneath it, the escalation is not about catching us. If it were only about catching us, it would not be confidential elevated. Confidential elevated means the content of the document creates a risk to the Commission's institutional position. Tanaka found something in the hero profile analysis that he reported accurately, and what he reported accurately has alarmed the Commission at the deputy director level. He looked at this for a long time. Then he wrote, very small, at the bottom of the page, Tanaka is not the problem. Tanaka might be an asset. He closed the notebook. He looked at the map. He thought about a 22-year commission analyst who filed honest reports even when the honest reports were uncomfortable, and who had written something significant enough to be escalated to the deputy director level, and he thought about what a person like that must be experiencing in the aftermath of writing it. He thought about a note taped to a wall outside a prison cell. He thought about the specific quality of information offered freely, without conditions, to someone who had the capacity to use it. He opened his notebook again. He began to write a very different kind of document than the ones he usually produced. This one was not an analysis. It was not a plan. It was something closer to a letter, written to someone he had never met, full of the specific honesty that he had found, over 18 months of this work, was the only thing that ever actually changed a situation rather than managing it. He wrote it carefully. He wrote it completely. When he was finished, he read it twice and did not change anything, because the changes he was tempted to make were the ones that would have softened it, and softening it would have been a disservice to the person he was writing it to. He put it in the notebook and closed it. He did not know yet how to deliver it. That was a problem for the next week. The next week's problems were sufficient for the next week. He looked at the clock. It was 12:40. He thought about going to sleep, which Midnight had told him on 6 separate occasions was something he did not do enough of, and she had been correct on all 6 occasions. He thought about the Sumida building and the 3 people still inside it and Saika Watanabe's notebook full of 9 days of true things. He put his head down on the desk. He was asleep in 4 minutes. In the morning, when the others arrived, he was already at the table with coffee and a new page of notes and the expression he wore when he had been thinking since before dawn about a problem he believed was solvable. The 3 in the Sumida building, he said, when Midnight sat down with her own coffee. I have a different approach for them. Less visible. It uses the provision but at the administrative level rather than the physical one. No one goes in. She looked at him. She looked at the notes. She picked up his coffee cup and examined it for evidence of how long he had been awake, which she could estimate from how cold it was. When did you get up? She said. I didn't go to bed late, he said, which was not the same as answering her question. She set the cup down. She pulled his notes toward her and began to read. Tell me the part you're not confident about, she said. He turned to the second page and pointed. She read it. She thought about it. This part isn't actually a problem, she said. You just haven't seen it clearly yet. Give me the pen. He gave her the pen. She began to write on the second page, filling the margins with the bold, spare handwriting that was the visual counterpart of his small precise one, and across the table from her the archive's map continued its patient accumulation of nodes and connections, the architecture of something that had begun with a note on a prison wall and was becoming, day by day and hour by hour, the shape of what came next. Act 3, The Letter and the Fire. Chapter 14, Everything Tanaka Wrote. The document that Hiroshi Tanaka submitted under the method review designation ran to 19 pages. It was the longest internal document he had produced in 22 years of commission service, and he had spent 4 days writing it, which was also a personal record, because Tanaka was not a person who took 4 days to write anything. He took however long the writing required and not a minute more. And the reason this one took 4 days was not that he did not know what to say. It was that he knew exactly what to say and kept stopping to look at it and consider whether he was willing to say it to the institution he had served since he was 26 years old. Each time he stopped and looked at it he arrived at the same answer, which was yes, because the alternative was to become the kind of person he had spent 22 years investigating, and he was not prepared to do that at this stage of his career or any other stage of it. The document opened with a methodological summary that was standard in form and function, covering the analytical approaches his team had used and their relative effectiveness. This section took 3 pages and contained nothing that would have alarmed a supervisory reader who stopped reading at page 3. The 4th page was where the document changed character. On the 4th page, Tanaka wrote, "The profile of heroes who have been contacted by the subject-designated ghost does not conform to the expected model for external recruitment or ideological radicalization. The heroes in question are not primarily characterized by grievance, personal instability, or susceptibility to manipulation. They are characterized by professional integrity, long records of unsupported volunteer activity beyond assigned parameters, documented internal resistance to agency practices they considered inconsistent with the purposes of hero work, and in several cases, formal complaints to agency management that were dismissed without investigation. The pattern suggests that the ghost is not recruiting from a population of disaffected heroes. The ghost is recruiting from a population of heroes who are doing their jobs in the fullest sense of that phrase and who have been systematically penalized for it." He had written this paragraph and read it back 6 times before leaving it in. The document continued. On the 6th page, he wrote, "Analysis of the contractual documentation available through normal commission registry access indicates that the agencies from which the majority of ghost-contacted heroes have departed employ contract terms that fall outside the median range in several categories. Geographic restrictions, behavioral compliance provisions, image rights clauses, and licensing payment obligations in these contracts are, taken individually, within the boundaries of commission-approved standard terms. Taken together, and applied specifically to heroes who have demonstrated the profile characteristics described above, they produce an effective system of professional constraint that significantly limits the ability of high-performing heroes to operate with the autonomy that their qualifications would ordinarily support." And on the 9th page, which was the page he had rewritten most often, it is the finding of this analysis that the ghost's operational objectives, as reconstructed from the pattern of contacts and agency departures, are not criminal in character. They appear designed to inform heroes of options available to them under existing statutes that the Commission's public documentation does not fully reflect, to provide practical support for heroes who choose to exercise those options, and to build an extra-legal network of hero professionals operating outside the agency system. The subject is not engaged in violence, property destruction, endangerment of civilians, or any conduct that falls within the standard categories of commission enforcement concern. The subject is engaged in what would, if examined without institutional presupposition, be described as an information campaign and a mutual support structure. He wrote 3 more pages after that, covering the geographic analysis and his conclusions about the archive's approximate location. He wrote them accurately and completely, because he had decided to write the document honestly, and partial honesty was not a concept he had ever been able to make peace with. Then he submitted it and waited. The call from his supervisor came 18 hours later. His supervisor's voice had the specific quality of someone who is attempting to communicate a significant thing through the medium of administrative neutrality. He asked Tanaka to prepare for the Monday meeting with the deputy director. He said the document had generated significant discussion. He said it with the cadence of someone for whom significant discussion meant something precise and not entirely comfortable. Tanaka said he would be ready. He ended the call. He looked at his bare wall for a while. Then he opened his personal laptop, which was not connected to the commission network, and he began to write something he did not know how to deliver. He had been thinking about who he was writing it to for 3 days. He was writing it to the person whose operation he had been investigating for 3 months, because that person had been more honest in their methods and their conduct than the institution that had asked him to find them, and because Tanaka was a person who found it very difficult to be less honest than the people around him. The document was not a report. It was not addressed to the commission. It was addressed, in the most functional sense, to a space he could not locate precisely, sent through no channel he had identified, and he knew this, which was why he was writing it on his personal laptop and not the commission machine. He was not sure what he was going to do with it when he finished it. He was not sure that doing something with it was the point. Sometimes the point of writing something was to find out whether you believed it. He had always found that writing the truth clearly was the best way of discovering whether you actually thought it was true. He wrote for 2 hours. When he was done, he believed everything he had written. He closed the laptop and went to the window of his apartment and looked out at the city, which was large and lit and full of people living their lives inside structures they had not designed and could not easily leave, and he thought about the ghost moving through all of it invisibly, erased from the record, building something in the spaces between the official account. He thought about the heroes who had left. The 12, now more, since 3 more had resigned from agency contracts in the 3 weeks since the Sumida incident, which he had not yet connected to the ghost but which his analyst Yui had flagged as statistically significant. He thought about 19 pages and what they had cost him and what they might cost him next. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. But he had not expected to. The Monday meeting with Deputy Director Keed Fujimoto lasted 47 minutes. Tanaka had met her 3 times previously, at all staff briefings and 1 investigative review, and he had formed an impression of her as a person of considerable intelligence operating at a level of institutional seniority that required her to express that intelligence primarily through the management of other people's intelligence, which was a particular kind of constraint he recognized. She had read the full document. This was apparent from the way she referenced it, not summarizing but pointing, specific page numbers, specific paragraphs, with the precision of someone who had read something carefully and formulated questions that the reading itself had generated. Her first question was about the 4th page. The characterization of the profile as indicating integrity rather than radicalization, she said. You're aware that this language, in a commission document, carries a specific institutional implication. I'm aware, he said. The implication being that if the heroes the ghost has contacted are characterized by integrity, then the system from which the ghost is removing them is characterized by something else. That implication is present, he said. I considered removing the language. I concluded that removing it would have made the analysis less accurate. She looked at him. She had a quality of assessment that he respected, the quality of someone who was evaluating what she was being told rather than what she wanted to hear. The 9th page, she said. Yes. You concluded that the ghost's activities do not fall within standard enforcement categories. On the basis of the conduct record as reconstructed. Correct. That conclusion, if accepted, removes the operational mandate for this investigation. He waited a moment before answering. The operational mandate as currently framed is to identify and neutralize a threat to commission oversight of the hero licensing system. If the ghost's activities are not threatening in the relevant sense, then the mandate's premise requires review. The room was quiet. Tanaka, she said, and the way she said it was the way of someone who has known for some time that a conversation was coming and has spent time deciding how to have it. I am going to tell you something that does not leave this room. The document you submitted has been read by 6 people above my level. 4 of them want it reclassified, sealed, and you reassigned to a different division. 2 of them, including me, believe that reclassifying it would be a mistake of the kind that produces significantly larger problems later. He absorbed this. What kind of problems? The kind that emerge when institutional practices that have been conducted under the assumption of invisibility become visible. The ghost is making things visible. Slowly and carefully, with evident strategic intelligence. The heroes who have left the system are not leaving quietly. They are leaving with information that they are, I have reason to believe, beginning to organize. She paused. The Commission has 2 options. It can continue to pursue the ghost as a security threat, which will produce a confrontation that I believe we are not positioned to win cleanly given the evidentiary picture you have assembled. Or it can choose a different posture. He looked at her. What different posture? I don't know yet, she said, and he heard in this the honesty of someone who was working at the edge of what they could plan for. But I think the conversation requires more than 2 people. And I think the ghost needs to know that not everyone in this building is oriented the same way. The room was very quiet. You want to make contact, he said. I want you to find a way to make contact. You're the one who has been studying them. If anyone knows how to reach them in a way that doesn't produce a confrontation, it's you. He thought about the personal laptop document he had not sent. He thought about the 43 buildings in the boundary region. Give me 2 weeks, he said. Chapter 15, The Shape of What Midnight Built. The first cohort of Midnight's curriculum completed their 3rd session on a Wednesday evening, and Namiri sat in the archive sublevel afterward with her notes and a cup of tea that had gone cold while she was reviewing them, and felt something she had not felt in a long time inside a professional context. She felt that she had done the right work. Not effective work, not commercially successful work, not work that had been approved by the relevant institutional frameworks. The right work. The work that needed to be done and that she had been building toward for the 4 years she had spent at UA trying to make a curriculum that served the students rather than the agency pipeline, and that she could now build completely because there were no memos and no board and no renewal coming up in 7 months. The 12 students in the cohort were dispersed across 6 prefectures and operating under varying degrees of institutional pressure. 3 were still inside agency contracts. 4 had recently departed agencies and were in the transitional period that the archives network was designed to support. 2 were retired heroes who had left the system years ago and whose knowledge of its historical operations was, it turned out, of considerable value to the people who were newer to understanding it. 1 was a licensing bureau employee whose name she did not know and did not need to know. 1 was a journalist. 1 was Kento Ida, who had still not formally departed his Meridian contract but had been using the 3rd-tier appeals process for 4 weeks and whose geographic restriction was now suspended pending resolution. The curriculum had 3 currents running through it simultaneously, which was the architectural decision she was most satisfied with. The first current was what she called the structural layer, a clear-eyed account of how the hero licensing system operated, the contractual frameworks, the Commission's oversight relationship with agencies, the historical development of the payment structures that Izuku had documented and that she had organized into a narrative that was accurate and complete without being overwhelming. This was the foundation. You could not choose your relationship to a system you did not understand. The second current was what she called the agency layer, which was simultaneously a legal term and the word for personal capacity, and she had named it deliberately for both. This was the practical layer, what options existed under current statute, how to access them, what they required, where the limits were. The removed 3rd-tier appeals provision. The voluntary status confirmation requirement that Kana had used in the Sumida extraction. The 15 other provisions buried in regulatory statute that the Commission's public documentation did not fully reflect, which Izuku's 2 years of research had produced and which she had been teaching one by one, with careful attention to when and how each was applicable. The 3rd current was the one she had thought hardest about. She had called it, in her own notes, the vocation layer, and it was the one that was most difficult to teach and most necessary. It was the conversation about why. Not why the system was the way it was, which the structural layer covered. Not what could be done within or around it, which the agency layer covered. But why the work itself mattered, what it was for at the level that predated licensing and contracts and agency relationships and the entire infrastructure that had grown up around the original impulse that sent someone to training and testing and provisional licensing and all the rest of it. She had a session from her UA days that she had called the original question, and it was the session she had most frequently been asked to modify by the department head. The question it asked was, before the system told you what heroics was, what did you think it was? And what would you do with the gap between those 2 things? She ran it now without modification. Without the department head. Without the board and its renewal decisions. The responses came through the secure audio channel and the voices of people who were not in the same room as each other and could not see each other and were, several of them, still inside structures that had spent considerable effort trying to narrow the space between what they thought heroics was and what the system required it to be. They spoke carefully at first. Then less carefully. Then with the quality she had been waiting for, which was the quality of people who have been waiting to say the true thing and have found a room where the true thing is not only permitted but required. She took notes. She did not interrupt. When the session ended she sat for a long time with the recording, which she would not archive anywhere external because the voices were identifiable and the content was the kind that institutional actors who had incentives to suppress it would very much prefer to suppress. She played it back once, all the way through. Then she opened her curriculum notebook and began writing the 4th session, which she was going to call What You Already Knew, and which was going to be the hardest one and the most important one and the one she had been building towards since the first day she walked into a classroom and understood that the thing she had to give the students was not what the curriculum said she had to give them. Saika Watanabe, 3 weeks after her extraction, had become something the archive had not previously had. She had become the person who knew what the inside of the program looked like. Not from documents. Not from second-hand accounts or reconstructed case files. From 9 days of direct experience, which she had recorded in careful daily entries in the notebook she had carried out of the Sumida building, and which she had spent the 3 weeks since transcribing into a formal account that was organized with the precision of someone who had spent 4 years making split-second observations in crisis situations and had developed a corresponding skill for accurate post-event reconstruction. The account ran to 61 pages when she finished it. She gave it to Izuku on a Tuesday morning without ceremony. He read it the same day, all 61 pages, which she knew because he had been sitting in the same position with it when she left at noon and was in a marginally different position with it when she returned at 4, and the notebook was closed in front of him and his expression had the quality it had when he was integrating something significant. The program has 3 phases, he said, without preamble, when she sat down. Yes. I labeled them in the account. Orientation, which is the first 4 days. Adjustment, which is the middle period. And what they called stabilization, which I was entering when you came. The orientation phase is primarily documentation. They record baseline behavioral and cognitive profiles through what are framed as wellness assessments. The adjustment phase uses the documented baseline to identify and selectively address what the program calls maladaptive professional frameworks, which in practice means any professional orientation that prioritizes intrinsic motivation over agency compliance metrics. Yes. And the stabilization phase completes the work by establishing a new behavioral baseline that is more consistent with the agency's preferred professional model, verified through reassessment against the original documentation. That's the clinical language they use, she said. The experience of it is different. I know. I read your account. He looked at her steadily. How are you now? She considered this. She had been considering it for 3 weeks, each morning and evening, with the particular attention of someone who wants to know the accurate answer rather than the comfortable one. I'm intact, she said. I was 9 days in. The account I read about the program in Kana's commission files indicated that the significant effects emerged primarily after the 2nd week. I was at the transition point but not past it. She paused. I dream about the room sometimes. The walls were painted a specific color that I can describe precisely and that I have not been able to look at since without my shoulders doing something involuntary. That's the most specific residual effect I can identify. Pale green, he said, because he had been in that corridor. Pale green, she confirmed. He wrote something in his notebook. She watched him write it and realized, not for the first time, that the note-taking was not merely record-keeping. It was the way he processed things that required processing. The small handwriting was the form in which he held things that were too large to simply think about. There are 3 others who went through the full program, he said. Based on the residential records Hannah has been tracking. If they're willing to give accounts, the documentation we could build from the combined testimony would be significantly more powerful than what either the case files or your account alone can provide. Multiple first-hand witnesses, documented independently, describing the same program from different entry points. You want to find them, she said. I want to give them the choice. Finding them is the first step. He looked up. The administrative approach I described to midnight worked for 2 of the 3 people who were still in the building when we extracted you. The 3rd was already in the late stabilization phase when the administrative filing was made and the timing did not hold. She has been released back to her agency. Released, Saika said, and the word sat in the room with everything it carried. Yes. He did not soften it. Her name is Fumiko Ase. Pro-hero candor. She has been back at her agency for 2 weeks. What I can observe from external monitoring is consistent with the program's documented outcomes. She is performing her agency duties without the behavioral compliance flags that preceded her program placement. Saika was quiet for a moment. Can she be reached? I think so. Not the same way as before the program. The approach needs to be different. He paused. I have been thinking about what the right approach is. I do not have a clear answer yet. The program does not erase who someone is. Your account makes that clear. It works by layering something over what is already there, a set of professional behaviors and framings that feel internally coherent because they are built from the real person's real capacities. It is not destruction. It is more like a rewrite over the top of an existing document, which means the original document is still there. He agreed. Recoverable. In the right conditions. She looked at him. What are the right conditions? That, he said, is what I have been working on. Chapter 16, How the Letter Arrived. Tanaka had been looking for the forum thread for 6 days. He was working from a reconstructed model of the archive's communication infrastructure, which he had built from the pattern of anonymous posts across 4 hero industry discussion platforms, cross-referenced with the timing of hero departures and the emergence of specific legal knowledge among heroes who had no obvious pathway to have obtained it. The model told him the archive was using a dead drop message system embedded in forum thread drafts, which was not a new method but which was being executed with a level of discipline that suggested someone who had thought carefully about where the standard version of the method created vulnerabilities. He had identified 3 candidate threads. He had ruled out 2 of them through analysis of the posting patterns. The third was the one he had been sitting with for 4 days, not accessing it, just observing the activity around it from the outside, because accessing it prematurely would collapse whatever observational window he had. On the 6th day he concluded that waiting was no longer producing useful information and that the cost of continued delay was higher than the cost of a direct approach. He created an account. He accessed the thread. He found the draft folder, which required the method embedded in the public statute's 3rd subsection, 7th paragraph, which he had identified from Izuku's pattern of legal citations in the cases he had reconstructed. He opened a new draft. He wrote 1 sentence. The sentence said, I wrote 19 pages about you and I believe every word of them. I would like to talk. He saved the draft. He closed the laptop. He went to make tea because he had been awake for 20 hours and needed something to do with his hands. He had not expected a response within the day. He had expected to wait, possibly for several days, while whoever monitored the thread evaluated the approach and decided whether to engage. The response was in the draft folder when he came back from the kitchen with his tea. It had been there for 4 minutes. It said, I know who you are. I have read your preliminary report. I have a document of my own that I wrote on a personal laptop that is not connected to any commission system, addressed to the same space I am currently writing to, which I also did not know how to deliver. I think we should exchange them. Tanaka read this twice. He sat down. He drank some of the tea. He wrote back, how do I know this is not a commission operation using the thread to locate me? The response took 3 minutes. It said, you don't. The same way I don't know this is not a commission operation using your identity to locate me. We are both operating on the same incomplete information and the same assessment of what the other person is likely to be, which is not a threat. I think you have been honest about what you found. I think you filed it and waited to see what the institution did with it. I think what the institution did with it told you something important. Am I wrong? Tanaka looked at the response for a long time. He thought about the Monday meeting. He thought about Deputy Director Fujimoto's voice when she said that 4 people above her level wanted his document sealed and him reassigned. He wrote back, you're not wrong. The response said, then let's talk about what we do with that. Izuku told the archive about the Tanaka contact that evening. He did not present it as a development that required immediate decision. He presented it accurately, which was his practice, and waited for the room to form its responses. Hana was the first to speak. How confident are you that it is actually him? 80%. The writing style, the reference to the preliminary report, and the specificity of the personal laptop detail are all consistent with my reconstruction of his communication profile. The 20% uncertainty is the scenario where the commission has reconstructed the same evidence trail and is using his identity to approach us. What does the 20% scenario look like? Lady Nagant said. It looks exactly like the 80% scenario from our side, he said. That is the problem. Then how do we test it? Midnight said. He had been thinking about this since the first response had arrived. We give him something to verify that the Commission would not want verified. Something that creates institutional cost for him if he acts on it. If he is Commission-controlled, he will not act on it. If he is genuinely operating independently, he will. Lady Nagant leaned forward slightly. What kind of something? The Sumida building. He does not know about it yet. It is not in any document his investigation has accessed. If we tell him the building exists, what it is, and what the Commission has been doing inside it, and he is a genuine actor, the professional obligation he has described in his document requires him to do something with that information that the Commission cannot have sanctioned. And if he is not genuine, Saika said. She had been listening quietly from the end of the table, which was where she usually sat. If he is not genuine, the Commission already knows about the Sumida building, and giving him the information costs us nothing they do not already have. He paused. The only risk is that telling him accelerates whatever response the Commission is planning for the building. Which means we need to move on the remaining occupants before we make contact. How long? Lady Nagant said. 72 hours for the administrative filings on the two who are accessible through that route. The third, Fumiko Ase, is the longer problem. Candor, Saika said. Yes. He looked at her. I think you are the right person for that contact. When we are ready. She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. All right, Midnight said. 72 hours on the administrative filings. Then we give Tanaka the building. The archive worked through the night. Chapter 17, the remaining two. The administrative filing mechanism that Midnight had identified was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications for the Commission's ability to respond, which was why it had never been used before. The voluntary status confirmation provision, invoked through the third-tier licensing appeals process rather than in person, created a formal documentation requirement at the Commission's compliance office. Once the requirement was in the record, any interference with the participants' confirmation process constituted an actionable violation of the Commission's own enabling statute. The Commission could, of course, revise the statute. Statutory revision required a public comment period and legislative coordination that would take months. The Commission could also attempt to suppress the filings, but suppression required a documented justification, and any documented justification for denying a participant's right to voluntary status confirmation would itself become evidence of exactly what the archive was building a case around. They filed for both remaining Sumida occupants within 4 hours of the archive's night session. The filings were submitted through the third-tier appeals portal using the accounts of 2 pro-heroes who had given permission for their credentials to be used in cases of this nature, which was a specific category of consent the archive had been building its network of willing actors around for the past 2 months. The Commission's compliance office received the filings at 8:14 in the morning. At 9:40, the first occupant was released from the Sumida building under escort to the compliance office for confirmation processing. At 11:20, the second followed. Neither of them had anywhere to go when the confirmation process concluded, which the archive had anticipated. Hannah was at the compliance office exit at 12:30 with 2 burner phones and a quiet word. Both of them came to the sublevel that afternoon. Their names were Ryosei Tanaka, no relation to the investigator, pro-hero full stop, whose quirk allowed him to temporarily freeze the kinetic energy of objects within a radius he could modulate, and Aiko Mori, pro-hero weave, whose quirk generated flexible structural filaments she could use for both construction and combat. Full stop was 41, the oldest person the archive had received, a hero of long standing whose commission file contained more behavioral compliance flags than anyone else in the Sumida program and whose flags all shared a common theme: repeated attempts to formalize internal advocacy processes for hero contractual reform. Weave was 28 and had been in the program for 11 days, which was long enough that Saika, watching her sit down at the table, recognized something in her posture that she recognized from her own first hours after the extraction. The quality of a person who is recalibrating their relationship to space that is not administered. Izuku did not begin with the archive's purpose or with a briefing on what they had built. He began with tea, which was Midnight's contribution to the archive's operational culture, and he asked each of them a single question, which was the same question he had asked Saika on her first evening. He asked, "What do you need right now, specifically, in the next 4 hours?" Full Stop said he needed to call his daughter, who did not know where he had been for the past 3 weeks because the agency had told her he was on a long-term assignment and he had not been permitted to contact her. The archive's secure phone was in front of him in 90 seconds. We said she needed to know if she was safe. Not broadly safe. Specifically, legally, professionally safe. Was there anything the agency could do to her for leaving the program before completion? Midnight had the relevant statute text in front of her in 4 minutes. She weaved through it paragraph by paragraph, with the patience and the precision she had spent 16 years developing, and when we've reached the end of the explanation her expression had the particular quality of someone who has been afraid of a specific thing for a long time and has just learned that the specific thing cannot reach her. Izuku watched this from the other end of the table and wrote a single line in his notebook, in the margins of a page full of operational notes. The line said, "This is what it is for." Fumiko Ase, pro-hero candor, returned to her agency desk at the Vertex Agency's facility in the Minato district 3 weeks after the program, and she did so with the quality that the program was designed to produce: competent, reliable, professionally appropriate, oriented toward the work her agency required of her rather than the work she had previously oriented herself toward without institutional approval. She did her morning patrol. She filed her reports. She attended her team briefing. She responded to a residential disturbance in the second hour of her afternoon shift with the efficiency that her record had always reflected, because the program did not remove competence. It redirected it. She was eating lunch alone, which she had been doing since her return because the texture of conversations with her colleagues had shifted in a way she could feel but not articulate. When someone sat down across from her, she did not recognize the woman. She was not from the agency. She was, Fumiko assessed quickly and with the professional habit that did not disappear, in excellent physical condition and carrying herself with the particular quality of someone who had spent a long time operating in spaces where being unnoticed was functionally important. "I am not going to take much of your time," Saika said. She was using a register she had thought about carefully before arriving, not urgent, not heavy, the tone of someone setting something down rather than pressing it in. "I am going to tell you something and then leave, and what you do with it is entirely up to you." Fumiko looked at her. Her expression was the expression the program had shaped, professionally pleasant, appropriately attentive, not revealing. "I was in the Sumida building," Saika said. 9 days. I came out before the stabilization phase finished. I know what they were doing there. I know what they did to you. And I know that what they did does not go all the way down. She said this last sentence quietly and without emphasis, because the emphasis would have been for her own benefit rather than Fumiko's, and this was not about what she needed. I was 9 days in and I still had to check myself every morning to make sure I was still there. I can only imagine what 22 days felt like. Something moved across Fumiko's face. It was small and controlled and it was there for less than 2 seconds. But Saika had spent 4 years making split-second observations in crisis situations and she saw it. "I do not know what you are talking about," Fumiko said. "I know," Saika said. "You do not have to. I am not asking you to say anything or do anything or even remember this conversation. I am asking you to know that someone who went through part of what you went through found her way out, and that the way out exists, and that when you are ready, if you ever want to talk to someone who actually understands what happened in that building, there is a person who will listen." She put a small card on the table. 1 number. Not a forum thread. A direct line to the archive's secure channel. She stood up. She gathered her tray. She walked toward the cafeteria exit. At the door she paused, not turning around, and said at a volume calibrated to carry exactly as far as the table she had left, "Your name before they gave you the hero name was Fumiko. The person who chose to become candor for the reasons you chose it was Fumiko. She is still there." She left. Fumiko sat with her lunch for 11 more minutes. She did not eat anything. She looked at the card. She put it in her pocket. Chapter 18, What Tanaka Did with the Building. The information about the Sumida building arrived in Tanaka's draft folder on a Thursday morning in the form of a document that was 38 pages long, methodically organized, and the most significant piece of evidence he had read in 22 years of commission service. It contained the Commission's own internal documentation of the stabilization program, drawn from the records Lady Nagant had brought from Tartarus. It contained Saika Watanabe's 61-page account, with identifying details removed, presented as a first-hand testimony from an anonymous hero who had spent 9 days in the program. It contained the architectural documentation of the Sumida facility, the patrol schedules, the staffing records Izuku had photographed during his night reconnaissance. It contained the administrative filing records for the 2 heroes who had been released through the voluntary status provision, documentation that was technically public record and that the Commission had not yet moved to restrict because they had not yet been certain it existed. The cover note, which was a single paragraph, said, "The building exists at the address in the attached map annotation. It is currently operating. We believe there are no remaining occupants as of 3 days ago. The documentation is verified through multiple independent sources. We are giving this to you because your document suggested you would know what to do with accurate information about institutional misconduct. We are prepared to be wrong about that. If we are wrong, we will know from what happens next, and we will adjust our assessment accordingly. We are reasonably confident we are not wrong." He read the 38 pages in 2 hours. He read them carefully and completely, and when he was finished he closed his personal laptop and sat at his kitchen table for 23 minutes, which was the longest he had been still since the Monday meeting. Then he picked up his personal phone and called a number that was not the Commission. It was the number of a journalist he had known for 15 years, who worked for an independent publication that did not have advertising relationships with any of the 4 agencies named in the archive's Meridian documentation, and who had a 15-year reputation for accurate, thoroughly documented reporting on institutional misconduct that the mainstream hero press had declined to cover. Her name was Izumi Nakamura. She answered on the second ring. "I have something," he said. "It is significant. I cannot tell you where it came from. I can tell you that every piece of it is verifiable through independent channels and that 3 of the primary documents are technically public record even if they have not been publicly indexed. I need you to tell me that you will pursue it regardless of who tries to suppress it." There was a brief pause on her end. "You have never called me before," she said. "I have never had something before. I have had things that could wait. This cannot." "Tell me what it is," she said. He told her. He gave her the building address and the program name and the voluntary status provision and the names of 4 agencies that he would not have named 6 months ago and could not now find a reason not to name. He told her about the heroes. Not their names, because names were theirs to give if they chose to, but the pattern of who they were and what the system had been doing to them and why. She listened without interrupting, which was something he valued about her. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. "Give me 72 hours to verify," she said. "You have it." And Tanaka. "Yes. When this publishes, your career at the Commission is over." He had thought about this. He had thought about it in the 23 minutes at the kitchen table and in the 4 days before the meeting and in the 2 hours of reading and in the longer accumulation of 22 years of knowing what the institution was while telling himself the story that made it possible to keep working inside it. "I know," he said. "All right," she said. "I will call you in 72 hours. The response to Tanaka's action arrived in Izuku's monitoring system 48 hours after the call, in the form of an unusual pattern of activity around the journalist Izumi Nakamura's publication. There were 3 inquiry requests from Commission-affiliated sources on record, 2 of which were framed as advertising partnership discussions and 1 of which was a direct call to the publication's legal department from a Commission communications officer asking about editorial timelines. He flagged this for the full archive and watched the room process it. "They know the story is coming," Lady Nagant said. "They know something is coming," he said. "They do not know the full scope or they would have moved faster. The advertising inquiry approach suggests they think it can still be managed." "It cannot." "How do you know it cannot?" Hannah said. "Because the documentation Nakamura now has includes public record material that the Commission cannot suppress without formally acknowledging that it exists to suppress it." The voluntary status provision filings are in the licensing portal. They have timestamps. Any attempt to remove them creates a separate evidentiary record of removal. He looked at the map. The Commission built the program under the assumption that the people inside it would not have the institutional standing to document it publicly. That assumption was accurate for 20 years. It stopped being accurate the moment the first person left with a notebook. Saika, from the end of the table, said nothing. She looked at her hands for a moment. What happens when it publishes? Said. He had been at the archive for 4 days now, and he had spent most of that time reading. He was a methodical reader, like Izuku, and he had worked through most of the archive's primary documentation in those 4 days. He asked questions in the specific way of someone who has read the context for the answer before asking the question. To us. To the people in this room. What changes? Izuku considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He had been thinking about it since the moment he had sent Tanaka the building documentation. Publishing changed the game in ways that were not all in the archive's favor. The Commission's investigation of the ghost becomes a different kind of investigation, he said. Right now they are looking for a security threat. After publication, if the story is thorough enough, continued aggressive pursuit of the ghost becomes a story in itself. The optics of intensified ghost hunting in the context of a story about Commission misconduct are not favorable for the Commission. That protects us, somewhat, in the short term. Somewhat, Midnight said. Somewhat. The Commission still has significant resources and the investigation does not stop. But the posture changes. The Deputy Director's posture has already changed. There are people inside the Commission who are not oriented toward suppression. He paused. In the medium term, publication gives us something we do not have now. Visibility. Not of us specifically, but of what we are documenting. The heroes who are still inside agency contracts that we have not been able to reach yet will read the story. Some of them will start asking questions they have not been asking. That creates conditions for the next phase of the work. And in the long term, Hannah said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the map on the wall, at the nodes and connections, at the work of 18 months distributed across the surface of a city that was about to become a different kind of operational environment. In the long term, he said, I think we have to be honest about the fact that we are building something in conditions that will not stay stable, and that the thing we are building needs to be built well enough to survive conditions we cannot fully predict. The story is the first public moment. The first public moment is when the work stops being invisible and becomes something else. Something that can be attacked, Lady Nagant said. Something that can also be joined, he said. Which is what we want. We have been invisible because invisibility was the right condition for the building phase. Visibility is the right condition for the next phase. He looked around the table. I want to be clear that this is a transition. I did not plan to make this quickly. Tanaka accelerated the timeline. I am not sure that is wrong. But I want everyone to understand what the acceleration means. The room was quiet with the quality of people who have understood something and are integrating it. Said, when I was 12 I read about All Might in a magazine. The article said that what All Might represented was the proof that a single person with the right power could make a society feel safe. He said this slowly, with the weight of someone who has been carrying a thought for a long time. I went into hero work because I believed that. I have been in the work for 19 years and I have a different belief now. What makes a society actually safe is not one person with the right power. It is enough people choosing to be honest about what the society is. He looked at Izuku. That is what this is. Right. That is what this is, Izuku said. Then I want to be useful to it, said. Not in the 4 hours of rest I have been taking since I got here. In the actual work. We will talk about what that looks like tomorrow, Izuku said. Tonight, rest. Looked like he might argue. Then he looked at the table and the notebooks and the map, and he nodded. Tomorrow, he said. Chapter 19, 6 days before publication. The 6 days between Tanaka's call to Nakamura and the story's publication were the most operationally intense period the archive had experienced, which was saying something given what the previous 2 months had contained. On the first day, Kento Ida formally initiated his geographic restriction appeal with the third-tier appeals process, becoming the first Meridian hero to take visible action. He did this at 9 in the morning at the Commission's licensing portal, in his own name, with full knowledge of what he was initiating. He told Izuku afterward, through the forum thread, that it had felt like the first time in 2 years he had done something his own way. Izuku wrote back, "That feeling is not going to go away. It gets stronger." On the second day, Midnight launched the second cohort of the curriculum. 18 students this time, a 50% increase from the first cohort, drawn from the broadened network. The second cohort included, for the first time, 2 people who were not currently or formerly in the agency system. One was a licensing bureau employee. One was a hero school student who had been quietly putting together her own analysis of the industry's contractual structure since her second year and who had found the forum thread through a route that impressed Izuku considerably when she described it. She was 17. He did not tell her this reminded him of anything. On the third day, Deputy Director Fujimoto called Tanaka into her office for what she described as a check-in. Tanaka, who was documenting everything at this point with the meticulous attention of a man who understood that his professional situation was shifting and wanted a clear record of every step in the shift, wrote the conversation up in his personal laptop file immediately afterward. She had asked whether he had taken any further action on the basis of his method review document. He had told her that he had exercised his professional judgment in a manner consistent with the obligations described in the Commission's own investigator conduct guidelines, which specified that investigators who discovered evidence of institutional misconduct in the course of their work were obligated to report it through appropriate channels and, in cases where those channels were themselves implicated in the misconduct, to external oversight mechanisms. She had looked at him for a long time. Then she had said, "I am going to pretend this conversation ended after the check-in update, which covered only the investigation's current status, which you described as ongoing. Are we clear?" He had said they were clear. He wrote this up and filed it in the personal laptop document, and then, on an impulse he recognized as the impulse of a person making a decision that was not reversible, he wrote a second copy and sent it to the archives draft folder. The response said, "Thank you for the documentation." The check-in conversation reads as a senior official choosing to not know something she has correctly assessed she cannot unknow. For what it is worth, I think she made the right choice. It protects her and it protects the information. Your judgment in how you answered was also correct. He wrote back, "I have been doing this for 22 years. I am surprised it took this long to feel like I was doing it right." The response took longer than usual. When it came, it said, "I have been reading about the hero industry since I was 12. The analysis is not what made it feel right. The feeling of doing something right does not come from analysis. It comes from the specific moment when what you are doing and who you are match closely enough to not require any adjustment. I think you know that feeling from other parts of the work. You are just recognizing it in this part now." Tanaka read this response 3 times. He was a 52-year-old commission investigator with 2 decades of experience and a very clear sense of his own professional identity, and he was being told something genuinely useful by someone he had never met and whose age he estimated at 18. He wrote back, "How old are you, actually?" The response said, 18. "Why?" He wrote back, "No reason." Then, "Thank you." The response said, "You are welcome." The story publishes in 3 days. Prepare accordingly. He already was. The 4th day was the day Fumiko Ase called the number on the card. She called at 6:47 in the morning, before her agency shift, from a public phone 3 blocks from the Vertex Agency's building. Saika took the call. The call lasted 11 minutes. Saika did not record it, because some things belonged only to the people in them. She told Izuku afterward, in the briefest terms, that Fumiko had asked 2 questions and that she had answered both of them, and that Fumiko had said she would call again when she was ready. What were the questions? Izuku said. The first was whether what happened in the building was reversible, Saika said. The second was whether the people on the other end of the number were the kind of people who would wait. What did you say to the second one? I said yes. We are the kind of people who will wait. He looked at her. Are we? We are for her, Saika said. Specifically. I told her specifically. Because she did not need a general policy. She needed to know that someone who had been in the same building and come out the other side was willing to wait for her personally. He nodded slowly. He wrote something in the notebook. What are you writing? She said. That the way we extend the network is not through reach, he said. It is through specificity. Everyone we have found has been found in a specific way. Kana was found through the specific quality of what she refused to do. Midnight was found through the specific work she was doing in the margins of an institution that was trying to stop her. You were found because you were doing the work the cameras did not cover, in a collapse zone, alone, with 2 broken ribs. He paused. The specificity is what makes the trust real. General offers of help are cheap. Specific ones cost something. The cost is what makes them credible. She looked at him. She had been at the archive for 3 weeks now and she had accumulated, in those 3 weeks, a particular category of observation about the person who had left her a note through a window in a place that felt very much like a prison even if the formal designation was otherwise. You do this for everyone, she said. The specific thing. You know the bakery Rampart goes to in the morning. You know that Kana would be hungry after an extraction. You knew what Midnight needed to hear to make the decision. You knew that I needed someone to say that what happened did not go all the way down. She paused. You know the specific thing for each person. How? He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the notebook. I pay attention, he said. It was not a modest answer. It was a precise one. He said it with the quality of someone identifying the thing they have done longest and most carefully. I have been paying attention to people for a very long time, in the specific way of someone who was invisible to them, which meant they were never performing for me. I saw people as they were when they thought no one was watching. And what people are when they think no one is watching is, usually, who they actually are. She thought about this for a while. That must have been lonely, she said. He looked at her steadily. He did not deflect the observation, which was what she had half expected. Instead he held it with the same quality of attention he gave everything else. Yes, he said. It was. For a long time. She nodded. She did not add anything to it, because it had been said clearly and completely and adding to it would have been for her own benefit rather than his. The 5th day was preparation. The 6th day was more preparation. Izuku slept, at Midnight's insistence, for 6 hours on the 5th night, which was 2 more than his recent average and which he agreed to because she was right that the work ahead required a functioning mind and his mind had limits even if he preferred not to acknowledge them. The story published on the morning of the 7th day. Chapter 20, The Morning of the Story. Izumi Nakamura had been a journalist for 23 years. She had published 17 major stories about institutional misconduct in the hero industry, of which 9 had produced commission responses ranging from formal denials to quiet regulatory amendments, and of which 4 had produced nothing public but significant private adjustments in institutional practice that she had documented and kept in a file labeled What Actually Changed. The story she published on the Thursday morning in the first week of July was the 18th. It was also the longest she had written, the most thoroughly documented, and the one she had worked fastest on, because the documentation had been so complete that the verification process, which was normally the longest part of her work, had taken 60 hours instead of the usual 2 weeks. She published it at 6 in the morning, which was the time she always published significant stories, because 6 in the morning gave the maximum window for the story to develop online traction before the Commission's communications office reached full staffing. She published it with the full documentation appended, 27 exhibits, including the voluntary status provision statute text and the timeline of its removal from public documentation, which she had placed at the top of the exhibit list because it was the piece that most clearly demonstrated that what the Commission had done was not accidental. The headline read, Inside the Commission Stabilization Program, What Happened to the Heroes the System Could Not Manage. By 7:30, it had been read 80,000 times. By 9, the Commission's Communications Office had issued a statement describing the story as containing significant inaccuracies and expressing confidence in the robustness of the Commission's oversight processes. The statement did not specify which inaccuracies. It did not address the Sumida building, the voluntary status provision removal, or the 27 exhibits. By 10:15, 3 major hero news outlets had republished the story with attribution. By 11, 2 members of the Diet had issued statements requesting a formal parliamentary inquiry into the Commission's hero management programs. By noon, the Commission's Communications Office had issued a second statement, which was longer than the first and which addressed 2 of the 27 exhibits and still did not address the Sumida building. In the archive sublevel, Izuku watched the coverage accumulate with the expression he wore when events were moving in the direction he had planned for but faster than the timeline he had planned around. Lady Nagant was reading the Commission's statements with the focused attention she gave to things she expected to need to respond to. Midnight was monitoring the hero community's response across 8 different discussion platforms simultaneously. Hana was outside, having elected to spend the morning in the city rather than in the sublevel, which she had told Izuku was because she needed the air but which he suspected was because she processed large developments better in motion than in stillness, which was consistent with everything else he knew about how she thought. Saika was reading the story itself, even though she had read the documentation it was based on. She read it the way a person reads an account of something that happened to them when it has been written by someone else, with the specific quality of attention of someone checking whether the external account matches the internal experience. "It is accurate," she said, when she finished. She said it quietly, to the room rather than to anyone specifically. "She is a very good journalist," Midnight said, without looking up from her monitoring. "It is not just accurate in the facts," Saika said. "It is accurate in the quality. The way it felt. She got that right without having been there." Midnight looked up then. She looked at Saika for a moment. "Anonymous first-hand testimony," she said. "Your account. I know. I authorized it." Saika paused. "I just did not expect it to read like that. From the outside. Like something real that happened to a real person. I think when you are inside it you stop being sure of that." The room held this for a moment. Full Stop, from his position at the end of the table where he had been reading for 3 hours, said, "In 19 years of hero work I filed 2 formal complaints about agency practices. The first one was dismissed in 4 days. The second took 6. I stopped filing them because the filing cost something and the outcome cost nothing, and after a while the calculation was obvious." He paused. "I want to file a public statement today. About the Meridian contracts and the behavioral compliance clause. I want it on the record in my own name." The room turned to Izuku. He thought about it for exactly as long as was necessary. "We need to talk about what that does to your legal position. The agency contract is technically still active until the termination process is complete." "I know. I have been reading the contract for 3 days. I know exactly what it does to my legal position." Full Stop held his gaze. "I have been in this work for 19 years and I have been making the calculation you are thinking about for most of them. I am done making it. If the cost of saying what is true in public is a legal proceeding with an agency that has been running people through a psychological adjustment program, I will take the legal proceeding." Lady Nagant said, from across the table, "I will be your counsel reference. My license is contested but not resolved. It is enough to create a formal advocacy record." Izuku looked at both of them. He thought about the 19th page of Tanaka's document, about the phrase moral clarity and what it meant when it became something a person acted on rather than something an analyst observed. "All right," he said. "Midnight, help him draft it. Clean language, specific facts, nothing that exposes the network structure. His story and his observations from inside the system. Nothing else." Midnight was already pulling up a draft. "Give me your account," she said to Full Stop. "Start from the beginning. Your first day at Meridian. What they told you the contract meant and what it turned out to mean." He started from the beginning. While he talked and Midnight wrote and Lady Nagant read and Saika watched the coverage on her tablet and Izuku tracked the Commission's response pattern against his predictions, the story spread across the city the way true things spread when they have been suppressed for long enough, quickly, with the particular energy of something that people have been waiting without knowing they were waiting to be told. By 3 in the afternoon, 14 heroes had publicly contacted Nakamura's publication requesting to share their own accounts. By 5, the commission had announced a formal review of its hero management programs. By 7, full stop statement was live. His real name, his real story, in language that was clear and specific and required no institutional translation to understand. It had been read 40,000 times by midnight. In the archive sublevel, after the others had gone to sleep or to whatever rest the evening allowed, Izuku sat alone at the table with his notebooks and his map and the coverage still updating on the screen beside him. He had a habit, on significant days, of writing a kind of accounting. Not a celebration and not a report. Something more like a ledger, what had been and what it had cost and what it had produced, kept in the small precise handwriting that was the private language of a self he had built in invisible spaces over years of careful attention. He wrote, "The story is out. Full stop statement is out. The commission is responding publicly rather than quietly, which means the internal calculation has shifted. The 14 heroes who contacted Nakamura's publication represent a number of people who were waiting for permission to speak that we did not give them. The story gave them that. We did not plan for this velocity. We should plan for more of it." He paused. He looked at the map, at the nodes he had added 3 days ago, at the connections running between them and back toward the center of the network. He wrote, "Kana has been operating as a field investigator for 6 months. She has not once told me what she gave up to do it. Midnight has been teaching a curriculum that no institution would approve, to people she will never meet in person, with the same attention she brought to a classroom she could have stayed in. Hana has been flying perimeters and making maps and asking nothing in return for any of it." Saika came out of the Sumida building with a notebook and turned 9 days of something very difficult into 61 pages of documentation. Full Stop made his call from the archive's secure phone before he had been here for an hour and then spent 4 days reading every document we have and then put his name on a public statement on the same day a major story dropped. "We sat in a chair in this room 2 days ago and looked at the table and said she wanted to do something useful as soon as her hand stopped shaking." He wrote, "These are not people I found. These are people who were already doing the work. I just gave them somewhere to do it together." He stopped writing. He looked at the last line for a long time. Then he wrote one more thing, at the bottom of the page, where he wrote the things that were not for the record but for the person writing them. "I was 12 years old in a school hallway and I disappeared from the world. I spent 6 years studying the spaces between the things that are visible. I spent 18 months building something in the dark. And I think, for the first time since I was 12, that the best thing I have ever done with this particular ability was not the disappearing. It was finding out what was there in the dark with me, and choosing to be visible to it." He closed the notebook. Outside, the city breathed and moved and carried on, enormous and luminate and full of the particular kind of motion that cities have when they have not yet understood that something has shifted in their foundations, that the invisible thing that holds certain arrangements together has been quietly and completely and without a moment's ceremony, gently but permanently, replaced. In the archive sublevel, with the map on the wall and the notebooks on the table and the work of the next day already beginning to assemble itself at the edges of what was known, Izuku Midoriya closed his eyes. He was 18 years old. He had been paying attention for a very long time. He was only just beginning.